Good evening. My name is David T. Gracia, and this is the Napa Valley Unified School District Board of Education. The NVUSD Board of Education is holding a special board meeting tonight, and we invite participation either remotely or in person. Directions on how to participate via Zoom are available at nvusd.org/board. Interpretation in Spanish is available for tonight's virtual board meeting. Our interpreters are Claudia Lindgren and Isidra Mencos. One of the interpreters will now translate the directions on our English channel so our Spanish-speaking families may hear the instructions.
Buenas tardes a todos. Los servicios de interpretación en español van a estar disponibles de una manera simultánea. Para tener acceso al servicio en unos momentos que se enciendan los servicios, ustedes van a notar en su pantalla en la parte inferior un símbolo de mundo o un globo terráqueo. Favor de hacer un clic en ese símbolo y se les va a dar la opción de elegir inglés o español. Pueden hacer un clic en el español y de esa manera pueden disfrutar de esta junta de una manera simultánea. Si están teniendo acceso por medio de su celular, van a notar 3 puntos, ya sea en la parte superior de su pantalla a mano derecha o inferior. Y donde abajo de esos 3 puntos van a notar una palabra que dice más o more. Favor de hacer un clic y de nuevo se va a lanzar el globo terráqueo. Hagan otro clic y se les va a dar la opción de elegir el idioma en español. Muchas gracias. Estamos a sus órdenes. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Can we please start with an attendance roll call from Vera Morales, Executive Assistant?
Yes, Student Board Member Gomez.
Present.
Trustee Gracia.
Present.
Trustee Water.
Present.
Trustee Reiser.
Present.
Trustee Shu.
Present.
Trustee Jankowicz.
Present.
Trustee Hart.
Present.
Trustee Gonzalez Mares.
Present.
Quorum present. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. All right. Thank you for joining us tonight for our NVUSD special board meeting. Now move on to item A1, flag salute. Trustee Hart, can you lead us in the flag salute tonight?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A2 announcement. This meeting is live streamed and recorded via Zoom and will be archived on the district's YouTube channel. For a detailed review of any meeting agenda item, the archive video can be referenced on the district's webpage at nvusd.org. The process for public comment can also be found on the district's webpage. By way of reminder, this is a special board meeting and there will be no public comment on non-agenda items. Item A3, approval of special session agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
First by Trustee Chu, second by Trustee Gonzalez Mares. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Now we will move on to presentations and discussion. Item B1, school planning and construction. B1A, presentation of indoor and outdoor education specifications.
Thank you, President Gracia. Welcome, Board of Education, NVUSD Board of Education, Student Board Representative Sam Gomez. Good to see you, and Dr. Musetti. Well, I have to tell you, I'm actually really excited to be here today. And I know you're probably wondering, why would you be excited to come today? It's bright and sunny, shiny out day. It's been gloomy for so many other days. The reason I'm excited is to share with you the journey that we've gone on since August of 2022. And as you know, I'm not so much relatively new to facilities anymore, but I'm starting my 5th year, completing my 5th year in facilities, prior to that obviously being a site principal. And my learning continues to expand in this new occupation. And so I was asked back in August, what do you know about educational specifications, Mr. Pearson? And I gave them this look like, what do you mean educational specifications? And that's what started this next journey, which is something we're going to explain to you tonight. So I'm excited to be able to share with you the learning that I have gleaned over the last 8 months, but as well as the learning that you're going to have tonight too, to share that with you. And so it's just another opportunity, I think, for me to share that learning that I'm going through and to help educate our Board of Education throughout this process. Next slide, please, Mr. Michaels. So our agenda, it will be, oh, sorry, Jordan, I don't even ask you for the slides. So there's the first slide. All right, second slide. If you go to the next slide, please, Jordan. So tonight we'll be doing some introductions, real quick introductions. I will set context and purpose of the educational specifications, and then you're going to hear two different presentations, one on indoor and buildings, interior and buildings on educational specifications, and then outdoor educational specifications as it relates to exterior learning. After each presentation, you'll have an opportunity for questions and answers, and we'll answer more at the end. And then we'll have a discussion around whether we will adopt this as a standard, if the board will adopt this as a standard, and then we'll conclude that. And hopefully we'll end, I have every anticipation to ending on time. If you go to the next slide, please. So I'm really pleased that I have been part of this really expert team, and you will meet several of these folks tonight. But I'm joined with the three consultants that you'll hear from is Kathleen Moore, and then Devin Conway and Wes Downing. And then I was joined on this journey with Kelly Jurgensen. I think you all know Kelly with our bond planning consultant. She's the vice president of Van Pelt Construction Services, and then Bill Savage. I think most of you have met Bill at some time or other, but Bill is part of the Van Pelt team as well, and he has K-12 facilities. All right, we can go to the next one, please. So just to keep sure we're grounded in things around our strategic plan, I wanted to point out that facilities are also part of the strategic plan, and they actually play, you could argue they play a role in lots of the goals. But with goal number one, I think it's important to make sure that we all know that facilities need to support the function. They need to, with goal one, there are several clearly lists incredibly important functions for facilities to serve. So I just wanted to highlight that we really do value goal number one from a facility standpoint. And then secondly, and where a lot of my items land is in goal 4 with tactical, proactive, and efficient asset management. And it's important when designing and building and modernizing facilities that resources should be allocated and spent appropriately. And using educational specifications, you'll learn, ensures that NVUSD staff will have a starting point when working with architects and contractors. And that's been one of the biggest learnings I've taken away from this journey, is having that starting point that you provide for the architects and you provide for the design team, versus just allowing people to design what they think is the best thing for their facility. You'll learn why that's important, to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible along this journey. The second thing under the street, if you go to the next slide, please, under board priorities. Again, our facilities need to follow the form, and they need to support our facilities need to follow the function of what's happening out there. In Tier 1 instruction, being a former site principal is incredibly important. So our facilities need to make sure that we're providing as great an opportunity for students to learn during Tier 1 instruction. And then I picked out two others that I thought were important. Priority 3 about strengthening early learning programs. You'll hear tonight a section around TK and expansion. And as you know, this is something that our district is ramping up to embrace. But we need to make sure that our classrooms are ready for our newest arrivals or our youngest arrivals in this upcoming school year. And then we also need to, our school planning and instruction staff need to understand the role of providing the best educational environments to encourage our TK enrollment to continue to grow, particularly in a declining enrollment district as we are. And then priority 4, I think again, it can't be overstated enough about ensuring that we are providing the types of facilities that meet the social, emotional, and mental well-being of all of our students. And our facilities can play a crucial role in helping bridge those gaps that sometimes our students are experiencing while they're coming to school here in NVUSD. If you can go to the next slide, please. So with the purpose of educational specifications, there are really 4 important roles why school districts should use this. The first one, and probably the most important, is by defining your ed specs, you're ensuring as a district that the form of the facility will follow the function of the educational program. And again, I want to just say that one more time. The form of the facility will follow the function of the educational program, not the other way around. And sometimes we do get lost in that. Sometimes we do decide to build something and then we make the function fit that. And that's not really good use of your resources. And so it's important that that we always keep in mind that whatever we're building is going to serve the function that it's needed and not the way around. And so that my department isn't driving it. It's actually being driven by other departments. And I'm the person that makes sure that the facilities represent that function. And a great example that we recently went through is the American Canyon Middle School Student Commons. We went through, not specifically like you'll see tonight, a really thorough educational specifications, but we did have several meetings with staff there. We wanted to understand the function that they needed in that facility, both from the Innovation Center, the library, and the Student Commons. And we really got a really good idea of what they needed. And I felt like we did a good job of meeting what those needs are is from a functional standpoint, and the form reflected that. So that's just wanted to highlight that example. The second part of the educational specification is obviously you want your ed specs to support your district vision. So tonight, when you're going through and you're hearing the content from both of our presenters, be thinking of our vision of transforming lives by instilling and inspiring lifelong learning in every student. And be thinking, do you see that? Do you see that in this? And I think it's important as each one of the board members that, yeah, I do see that. Maybe not in every single thing, but that I see that out there, and I really feel connected to that. The third thing with ed specs is that the school district will have a standard outline for future school projects that will provide direction and a starting point. And that is so crucial, I've learned in this role that I now assume, because a lot of times we will sit there and we'll say, okay, we would go to a school and say, well, what do you want? And of course, folks, they want everything. I mean, who can blame them when you give them that open-ended question? They're like, what do I want? Of course I want everything, And then we have to manage expectations. And then that creates some discourse, some people feeling like, oh, you're not listening to me. And that's what ed specs provides us, is it just provides that standard for a district. And it's something I think we've all been getting better and better as a system, is standardization. And then to build on that, it provides direction for your design team. And so when you provide that direction for your design team, by default, you're streamlining the process so that you're helping your design team get that jump start, and you're really maximizing your resources. You're not using your resources in such a way where they are starting from scratch and you start paying them from scratch, because that's another part of the learning is once you engage someone in a conversation, the clock starts ticking, the dollars start getting spent. And that's not everybody always knows that. So those are really the four main areas about educational specifications. And you'll hear a little bit of that from each one of our presenters throughout the presentation too. And so before I begin and introduce our first consultant, I want to let everyone know that the presentations tonight reflect important information the consultants gleaned from each of their respective draft educational specification reports that have been submitted. And again, they're still in draft form. So we're obviously will welcome feedback. During each presentation, I might periodically jump in. So if I ask the one presenter to move aside or something, know that we've already discussed that. There's nothing they've done wrong or anything. We may just do that. The third thing is at the end of each presentation, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. So try your best to hold questions until the end. And then we'll obviously answer more questions at the very end on both presentations, albeit if there are more after that at that point. Okay, ready? Okay, good. All right, so first up, if we can go to the next slide, please. It's really a great honor for me to introduce Kathleen Moore, who is overseeing and has a company named by Kathleen Moore and Associates. Kathleen comes with a rich amount of experience that we're very fortunate to have been able to utilize her resources over this last 8 months. You can see some of the things that she's been a part of in the past, but her knowledge and her breadth and depth of knowledge has been really instrumental in helping us really create some important documents here and get what I believe is a really instrumental document here to help provide that specification and direction for the districts, for the school district. So I will let Kathleen continue with her presentation, but if you'll, I was going to ask you to clap, but we don't clap at board meetings. So without further ado, I will introduce Kathleen Moore. Kathleen.
Not necessary. So next slide. Good evening.
Jordan, if you could go to her presentation.
Perfect. Good evening, President Gracia, members of the board, and Superintendent Musetti. It's an honor to be here tonight to review the work we've done over the last 8 months, establishing the elementary and secondary educational specification. Next slide. Tonight, we will review why Educational specifications are a best practice, what they are. We'll go over highlights in each of the area and then take questions and discuss next steps. Next slide. As Mr. Pearson said, a simple definition of educational specification is form follows function. So we're really looking closely at what is the educational function that we need to support with the building. Next slide, please. The educational specifications are a written document. They describe the curriculum goals, the people to be served, the learning activities, special relationships, and square footage. They also look to the future and don't just represent current conditions. And most importantly, they're educationally driven. Next slide, please. So Mike touched on a few reasons why we use educational specifications, but I like to say that it's for the students. They deserve to thrive in modern facilities. We're wanting their hearts and minds. It's for the staff to support the ways teachers teach today, differentiated, project-based, hands-on, small groups, lectures. It's for the community, the educational priorities. It builds consensus. It helps the facilities program. It establishes parents wanting to go to our schools. And it's also for California funding. So if it's a new school project, it's a requirement. Next slide, please. It's important to note, however, that not all the recommendations within the educational specifications will be realized due to budget or the site or other constraints that may change over time. They're intended to serve as a guideline for programmatic needs and to give the design professionals flexibility in addressing the unique requirements of each site. Next slide, please. So this was our timeline. As Mr. Pearson indicated, we began in August. We established an executive committee and we established guiding principles, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then through, we had initial meetings in September for each of the specific areas. And then through October through up until 2 weeks ago, we worked with subject matter experts, gaining input. We did site visits over this time with the executive committee and also with teachers. And then there's been time to write and vet the document. And then we have our board study session today. Next slide, please. The executive committee is it was formed and it's the cabinet. And their role was to advise facilities on who we would best meet with over the course of the project. Next slide, please. Back in August with the executive committee, we established these 4 guiding principles for the Napa Valley Unified School District. And the first principle being flexible and collaborative learning environments. Classrooms and other spaces will be flexible and collaborative to support a variety of teaching and learning formats for better academic outcomes. Guiding principle number 2 is student-focused and community-minded, so that the school facilities will focus on student learning and engagement and be mindful of community needs and use. Guiding principle number 3 is sustainability. School facilities will be environmentally sustainable and also supportive of possible future uses and configurations. And then the final guiding principle is comparable facilities and aesthetics, is that projects will support the district's programmatic needs and be architecturally pleasing. So next slide, please. the elementary educational specifications. So we concentrated on these 6 areas, which really are the major areas of an elementary schools. And each space we lead with what are the educational requirements. Remember the function that I talked about earlier. We do know about future trends in the area and what is best for students. So next slide, please. As universal transitional kindergarten expands in the state, it is important for there to be adequate space for centers for drama and books and art and science and other types of exploration. Learning for TK is play-based with strong connections to the outside. There are in-room restrooms, cubbies, mobile tables and chairs, centers scattered throughout the room, and child-sized sinks to support the learning and development environment. Next slide, please. Children at this level must have the opportunity to work within individual, small group, and large group settings. Outside, there will be a need for water-based play areas and areas to develop both small and large motor skills, and shade structures and tables for dining. Next slide, please. Excuse me while I take a little drink. So classrooms. Place matters. We know through the research that clean air, ample daylighting, and a small, quiet, comfortable, and safe learning environment is important for students' academic achievement and well-being. So as we look to modernize existing classrooms, like you have done here with Napa Junction, we are looking at areas that will have the most impact on student learning and well-being, beginning with natural lighting. So you can see window placements for improved natural lighting being a top priority for existing classrooms. Next slide, please. So multipurpose rooms. We have walked existing school sites, talked with staff, and added new elements to multipurpose rooms, such as a roll-up door and linkage to a covered outside dining area and ability to serve school functions or serve after school functions for the new multipurpose rooms. The finishing kitchens are modeled from American Canyon Middle School's new kitchen and are larger to support universal meals and the scratch-based fruits and vegetable forward menus of your food service department. Next slide, please. Here's an example of the written educational specification. We talk about what is the vision, what are the current trends, what is the curriculum and anticipated use, what are the teaching and learning activities, and where is the space oriented versus other buildings on the campus. Next slide, please. Then we look at what are the specific requirements for each space to support learning. And finally, what are the square footage requirements? So this is just an example section of the educational specification.
This is where I want to jump in and point out that this was not available when I started in this position. And so this is a key component that you can see where we outline this square footage, what we want. So when we start to talk with an architect, we can say to the architect, tell us what we're missing, but this is what we want. And then tell us what we're missing, instead of them taking time to figure out what it is we want and going through this process where, quite frankly, we're wasting money. We have this to start from. So I just wanted to point out that this is part of that process of giving us that template to start from. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Next slide. Each area has photos of examples. As you see here is a well-lighted, organized, multipurpose room. And next slide. Connections to the outside with an amphitheater that serves a multitude of activities, including celebrations such as promotions. We heard that was an important component from principals at the elementary level. So next slide. As multipurpose rooms are built, new multipurpose rooms across the district, there's the opportunity to convert the existing multipurpose rooms into new libraries and flexible classrooms for art and science. Next slide, please. The Independent Library Association indicates in a forward-looking library, flexibility is key. Flexible space is provided by having fixed bookcases on the perimeter and mobile cabinetry on the interior with a variety of seating, including soft furnishings and reading nooks. We worked with Monica Reddy and the district librarian to determine about a 5,000 to 7,000 book ranges on the volumes for current, relevant, and supportive of elementary curriculum. Next slide, please. We also visited new libraries in the area, including this one at Harder Elementary in Hayward, where you can see a variety of seating, the mobile book cabinetry, and you can't see it in this photo, but they have perimeter book cabinets as well. Next slide. We can also see the variety of seating, books along the perimeter, and mobile cabinetry at your new library space in American Canyon Middle School. Next slide, please. While multipurpose conversion to libraries is the priority, if there is additional space, we are specifying a room that can work for both art and science and is connected to the outside. Next slide, please. With mobile furnishings and casework for maximum flexibility, like this example, this is what we're looking for at those art and science areas. So that concludes the elementary specification. We'll discuss outside learning environments and all access restrooms at the end of the presentation because it affects both elementary and secondary. So next slide, please. We specified these 9 areas at the secondary level, including classrooms, applied science and technology, wellness centers, physical education, library media centers, performing arts, student commons, and outside flexible learning spaces with the options for all access restrooms. Next slide, please. Like the priorities for elementary classroom upgrades, we are looking at areas that will have the most impact on student learning and well-being, beginning again with natural lighting. You can see what that looks like in an example in this photo. Next slide, please. Applied science and technology for career ready. The vision for applied science and technology areas is for a student-centered space that enhances the offerings and building interdisciplinary and project-based learning possibilities for students to be college and career ready. Napa Valley Unified School District is geographically located in the world-renowned Napa Valley wine region and has the unique opportunity to continue to align science, technology, and engineering programs offered to an adaptable and sustainable viticulture industry, together with career offerings in product manufacturing and biotechnology. We spoke with community members in the wine and biotechnology area for greater insights on how we could best serve students and align with opportunities here in the Valley. Next slide, please. These are the types of flexible science space for applied science and technology we are specifying, with lab stations on the perimeter and flexibility to have classroom orientation and then break out into lab functions. We are also envisioning a multidisciplinary approach so that other flexible spaces are specified, whether it be in a new building or an existing space.
So let me jump in here. So I know some of you have had students go through the high schools where they have the science labs, where they have the classroom area, and then they have the lab area, right? Actually a rather large classroom. When we went and visited this particular campus, The key element here is those desks and the furniture move to the labs, and in the distance, you can see the sinks out in the distance in this picture. So it actually, you don't have to have as large a classroom as you typically would, because the students are moving flexible, the furniture is flexible enough for them to move, do the experiment, and then come back, which we thought was a really interesting and innovative design thought to put in there, so that you're not overbuilding something. Because in reality, how many, I mean, students are doing a fair amount of experiments, but it's not an everyday thing. And so you want to maximize your space as much as you possibly can and not overbuild, but use it but have the flexibility to do the experiments and things. So I just wanted to bring your attention to that. Thank you.
Mhm. Next slide, please. Wellness centers support the Napa Valley Unified School District's wellness program and is focused on health, well-being, and academic success of Napa students and their families. The specifications, take a holistic approach and include physical education offerings that we will talk about next. The executive committee visited both the district's own and other high school wellness centers in the area, like the one depicted above. We are specifying a suite of spaces, including areas for small group student meetings, to a conference room, to offices for district wellness staff and community partners. This area is also aligned with the nurse's office and exam room. Next slide, please. So physical education highlights. Again, the executive committee and teachers visited other high schools and community colleges for ideas in delivering a robust physical education program for all students to engage in lifelong fitness. These areas include a fitness center, weight room with a roll-up door and 3 rack systems like those pictured that can serve 45 students at a time. So this is the evolution of weight rooms into areas that are not just serving athletics, but that engage students for lifelong fitness. Next slide, please. An all-purpose physical education room is specified that it will allow for low-impact sports, adaptive PE, yoga, and meditation. It will also serve extracurricular needs like cheer and dance. Next slide, please. A physical education classroom that will serve a multitude of uses, including health classes, is also in this area, as well as PE offices, equipment storage, and a strong connection to the outside, like what is pictured here for good conditioning adjacent to the physical fitness rooms. Next slide, please.
Let me jump in.
Sure.
Jordan, can you go back one more time? So one of the things that we learned through this journey is sometimes, and not to say something, a lot of times schools miss the opportunity to engage the outdoors. And you don't realize, like, if you create a physical education complex, you can actually use the building and parts of the outside part of the building to engage students in physical education. So when you see this particular example here, this is where they put a field, small synthetic turf field out. And it was, Kathleen actually visited it, and it was highly used by the high school because it's adjacent to their physical education complex. Instead of making them go all the way out to a track and field or something to that effect, it's right there. So utilizing that area around the actual complex that you have there. And that's a theme we saw throughout, all these ones, but I wanted just to highlight this one. So.
Thank you. Next, we're there. The district has already begun modernizing high school libraries. And with these modernization, there's the opportunity to create a sense of openness, of collegiality. It is less about the books and more about interactions. Interior mobile shelving allows for flexibility, and a variety of furnishings include soft furnishings allow for different uses. Books are important, they're a part of the library, but we're oftentimes seeing the openness. Libraries open up and serve a variety of functions and have different kinds of seating throughout that allows students to collaborate and engage in different manners. Next slide, please. This is an example of the open, flexible library space with books on the perimeter. Again, we worked with the district librarian for the total number of volumes of current relevant books that support the curriculum. And also have noticed the program at the high school level to move library books also into the classroom. So that creates additional space, I think, within the library area for these types of functions. Next slide, please. So performing arts. For performing arts, we're looking at providing sufficient facilities with the additions of additional performance space. Black box theaters, like the one that is pictured above. Both of the high schools have performing arts area. They could probably be modernized, and neither of the high schools have performing arts or this type of assembly space that is often seen in high schools. Next slide, please. So to support the district's NOSH program and rethink the cafeteria space so it is inviting for all and serves a multitude of functions, the specifications provide for, next slide, please. Space like this example, where there is a variety of seating and food delivery options like a bistro for grab and go. You've begun this at with your middle school project and its commons. Next slide, please. It's a space that can be available to students all day long to study, collaborate, and be social. Commons are more and more common, excuse the pun, at the high school level and are patterned off of college commons where a variety of functions occur.
So board, think about the cafeteria spaces right now at American Canyon, Vintage, and Napa High School. And then look at that picture and say, do you see that happening at those in those? And in some instances you may, but in a lot of instances you don't. And part of it's just different furniture, you know, that inviting furniture for students to come in. And I'm here, Sam's right here and he can speak to that too, but having that different type of furniture instead of the standard, you know, roll that we have the fold up chair, the fold up things and the 8 legs, they come down and kids sit on these not very comfortable chairs, to be really honest with you. And it just doesn't invite, just, you know, you see 2 students up here on their computers. Maybe they don't want to take part in lunch or they don't want to eat lunch, but there's just that space that's created for that. So we originally weren't putting this in, but in visiting a number of the high school sites that we did visit, I just felt it would be remiss of me not to put this into our specifications as we going forward, because our current facilities are 50 years old, or if not older than that. And just like I said, just a little bit of new furniture and some paint would actually make each of the cafeterias, which I like to refer to as commons, more inviting for the students to come in and participate in. So just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So all access restroom options. The educational specifications provide for the option of all access restrooms where there is high visibility, different types of hardware, full height walls, and banks of sinks. Next slide, please. The design of all access restrooms has been trending in schools throughout the state, the country, and frankly, the world. Traditional school restrooms are gendered, designed separately for boys and girls. All access restrooms are not gendered. All students may access and use the facility. Here is an example of an all access restroom for a high school and a middle school. And you can see the bank of sinks and then each individual stall.
So when I was showing this, I got a little nervous initially. You know, I put my middle school hat on, principal, high school hat on, and we had a lot of good, solid discussions around this. And I decided that this should be included. And one of the main reasons I decided it should be included for future consideration is right now we go around and say gender neutral restrooms. And when someone goes in there, what do people think about that student? Versus if they're all access, it doesn't matter, right? Exactly. And so that was that was probably for me, one of the things I thought why I wanted to have it be included in here. And then the other thing I was worried about was supervision, from the standpoint of, if there's, you see where the sink is and things, but if you create it where there's a good, strong lines of visibility and lines of sight, it shouldn't be that big of an opportunity. And then again, if you think about other facilities out there, from restaurants to other places, they have this already kind of happening as it is going on as well too. So when Kathleen went to a conference and she learned about this and that's when we started. Probably it was a month-long conversation we had in regards to what do we include it, do we not include it, and like I just said, at the end I felt it was important to include it, for the reasons I just outlined earlier to you. So I just wanted to give you a little context behind that. Okay.
Is the idea that moving forward, we would transition to our restrooms being all of them being all access, or just that there would be one area in which there was that option?
So great question, Trustee Reiser. And I think, with our current facilities the way they are, whether we have these opportunities or not, we'd have to explore how we can make that happen, because there obviously is going to be a design feature to this. There's going to be a cost feature to all those. But if we have the opportunity in some of our newer buildings, if we were to build newer buildings and we needed an all-access restroom area, we should strongly consider that on that. Whether we're able to take current standards that we have and actually modernize them, and it's going to require us to go to this, to sharpen our pencils and really look at, does it make sense to put it in that particular spot? And it may not. It just we may continue to keep the type of restroom that we have, the male or the female restroom. But when we have the opportunity to think about it, I think we strongly should as a system. Okay.
Next slide, please. This is an example for an elementary school. Oftentimes we're hearing that school districts are starting actually with their elementary schools, and then their students begin their educational path with all access restrooms. And as they move along in that path, they have knowledge of those. I just indicated to Mike that as you proceed with your facilities program, this area will benefit by a robust public engagement with students, staff, and community. Next slide, please. Lastly, outside flexible learning spaces are specified K-12. You will have a robust discussion of this area with Verdi Design. We also included it in the educational specification as it is an important learning space and is part of the total school landscape ecosystem. Next slide, please. We hear more and more about the benefit of greening school campuses for all students. And from the research, it has an even greater academic impact for children suffering the effects of economic inequality, systemic racism, and trauma. So it's a very important space, and it's one that we're hearing more and more about, including in new school construction projects, as well as when we have the opportunity to modernize our campuses. Next slide, please. The educational specifications indicate a minimum of providing a space directly adjacent to classrooms for small group instruction areas like those pictured. You can just see it's a simple cement treatment, but it is a space that students could come out and work in small group and still be supervised by the classroom teacher. Next slide, please. I conclude this presentation with many examples of outside learning environments at both the elementary and the secondary level. This is elementary, and that will segue into the next presentation. I thank you for your time this evening, and I especially want to thank the leadership of Mike Pearson and the input of the executive committee, teachers and staff, principals and community members, that inform these educational specifications. And I'm happy to take some questions.
Trustee Jankowicz.
Sorry. Earlier in the presentation, a walk-off area, that was the terminology used in one of the slides, is a walk-off area when you walk out of a classroom and there are those small kind of learning.
No, the
Outside
walk-off
environment?
area is interior to the classroom. It's where you walk in and walk
Okay.
off.
When next time you're if you're visiting Napa Junction or Snow and you walk into the classroom, we put walk-off mats right inside the rooms. And then we put them in front of the seats so that there's a different type of carpeting that we use. It's more
Okay.
absorbent. So if there's, the wetness.
So not what I
or
thought the
things like
answer was
that.
going to
Yeah,
be.
sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do want to say that this presentation reads like a marketing guide for the issuance of a $2 billion bond. Which I appreciate. You made during this presentation, and this may be a question or a comment that's more appropriate for the end, so please let me know. Obviously, in a declining enrollment environment, we're not doing a lot of new builds. So it sounds like as we have the opportunity, if we do get the opportunity to float another bond in 2024, after I'm sure discussion, we will convert certain existing facilities that need upgrades, and we will have a template, if you will, that will allow consistency, equity. It will allow the community to understand that if we're going to, hopefully an example of this would be executed prior to the issuance of a bond so that the community can understand a concrete example of what those bond dollars could do and the importance of this construction as a learning tool. But I just clarifying that this is all kind of assumptive that if we have funding and that this could be a what if, it's this really difficult emotion of, damn, this is, it's hopeful. It's a ton of excitement of what could be. And then the reality of what transpired when the community did not understand the importance of this presentation and we did not pass the bond.
Well, yes, and I will say yes. And then what I mean by that is, yes, it can serve the future needs for, let's say, in schools in Napa, but it will serve us for the bond that we have in American Canyon. Because many of many of the things you heard about today, those specifications we will be utilizing as we execute on the $25 million, excuse me, not billion. I wish it was billion, but $1 million bond down in American Canyon. And that was part of our reasoning also in wanting to do this. We also had that tension of the declining enrollment and how far do we go, but we just felt it was better to push it all out there.
Absolutely. To know what is available
and to have it available for the future. Because if you don't have it, then again, you're going to wind up in this process where, your design team comes in, what do you want? That whole 9 yards.
If you don't know what to ask for, then you can't put a design and it's the whole thing that you said, it's the facility should support the function. And if we don't know what the opportunities are, we can't adhere to that. So it was really well done. Thank you.
Trustee Chu.
So I have a question about the designs of your ideas of the multipurpose room in the libraries. So I'm just going to say, coming from Canyon Oaks, it was designed to be too small, I think, because we didn't have many of the things that you talked about. Because if we had that, we probably would have had a much bigger multipurpose room, definitely a bigger library, maybe double the size, I'm hoping, because there are 700 kids in there. And then you have schools up in Napa that are in 200, 300 range, very different scale. So when you talk about a multi-purpose room of 7,000 square feet, is that sufficient for a school? Well, we'll just say Donaldson Way, which is, I'm hoping that they will get a good sized multi-purpose room out of this bond that we just passed, because they sorely need something bigger than what they have. So how do you calculate, like, what is the appropriate square footage for a common use space like that, where you might have maybe half of the student body coming in? And when you're talking about half the student body over in American Canyon, very different than up in Napa. So
How do you calculate that? Or is there a formula that you're going to be using?
So I'm going to let Kathleen tell you some of the square footage specifics, but I will tell you that from our perspective, we wanted to be able to seat 300 to 400 students in a multipurpose room. And in speaking with elementary principals, that's the maximum number of students that we'd be out at lunchtime. So for seating purposes, for lunch purposes, that's what we were gauging
So
it
it's
on.
staggered.
Because they stagger their lunches, exactly. So, and that seemed to be fairly consistent with all the principals that we talked to. We also wanted to create a space so that they could have a full school assembly as well too. So then you take the tables out and students can sit on the floor. So we wanted to make sure that that was a part of the multipurpose room as well. We wanted to also create and we didn't do this, we haven't done this in the Napa Junction, excuse me, Donaldson Way would be the first one we do this, where we create that experience when they go outdoors, so the roll-up doors or something to that effect, so that there's this connection back and forth. And we feel that's also going to really enhance the use of the multipurpose room. Then to speak to the library. So what we would do at Donaldson Way would be to repurpose the current multipurpose room. And as Kathleen was talking, you know, the first priority would be to make sure you develop and build an adequate sized library to fit that school campus. And if you have additional space that you can use and put into a science and art integration building, you would do that. But that's the part that should vary. It's the size of the library should be the primary driver on that. And if you can then utilize more space, which or some of the space for the art and science integration, you can do that. But we do anticipate, for example, at Donaldson Way, that we won't get as maximum amount of space on that side as we would on the library, to speak to your very comment, Trustee Chu, around the size of the campus and the number of students in there. And from a square footage, I'll let you talk a little bit.
It's a very astute question in that in the educational specification in the written part, there is an asterisk around the square footage, and it indicates one that you at the time of construction that the design team is checking in with the demographer so that you're looking to 5 years in the future and building for that. And it could be a decline, it could be an increase. And then there's a fairly standard square footage per student, but these other areas that Mike talks about, like the storage for chairs and the physical education storage and the finishing kitchen, because of the types of meals that we're doing now, universal meals for all students. Those are a little more standard, but you can range depending upon the size of the school. And that's appropriate and it's anticipated.
With our existing finishing kitchens, many which are new, would you modify our existing new kitchens, or how does that work?
Yeah, we would probably not be modifying our existing kitchens necessarily. But we do, going forward, in any new finishing kitchen we do need to really factor in the universal meals. That was something that was not
It wasn't on the
obviously
table then.
on the table. Even when we did American Canyon Middle School, it wasn't on the table. And we were very conscious of pricing, and so we didn't want to overbuild. But the reality is we probably should have done that kitchen a little bit bigger than what it actually was. It still serves the needs, but there's some tight spacing in there, and it would have been nice to have a little bit more, because we're increasing, and the reason it's it's not so much the tight space is bad, but we're increasing the staff to serve the increased student need. That's what takes up more of the spacing inside the kitchen itself.
In that last slide where you had, at the very end, you started talking about outdoor learning communities and outdoor spaces. And then right prior to that, there were those wonderful kind of almost coffee shop looking indoor areas where students could, gather and if they weren't going to lunch, and kind of a safe place. Couldn't that, if we don't have the interior footprint to do that, let's say, because we're not going to do a lot of new builds, couldn't that same concept be provided in some of these outdoor spaces at a very low cost, but they would serve dual purposes?
Yeah, you could do that. What I would see too, though, is taking those current spaces that are existing and basically pulling some of that furniture out and putting the new furniture in to make it more inviting. I mean, that's just very simple, and a very cost efficient way to do that. But you could do some things, new things with the flooring, for example. You could look at some paint in there. And those are some of those options as well too.
But what is that space that you're referencing within the school structure now?
The cafeteria.
Oh, in the cafeteria.
Yeah, the cafeteria.
Okay.
Sorry. They want to be.
So it's just because so are cafeterias large enough to do that?
Our cafeterias are large enough to modernize. Yes, they're not necessarily large enough to take on the entire student population. So the cafeterias you saw, there are new builds. And so they were built specifically in a student commons type of like environment, for a student type commons type of like environment. We would be trying to create something similar in that, but given our current existing structure.
And actually I think those examples aren't too much different in terms of square footage of what you have. It's just different types of furnishing.
It would appeal to secondary much more than the traditional cafeteria side tables. I mean, that I think would get kids to
I mean,
come in
when-
and socialize and
Exactly.
Would
And
be
when
really
we
effective.
visited those sites, I think that Mike can tell you, there were it was, 9 in the morning, there were students inside the cafeteria studying at those spaces. You have to, there's a happy medium between,
Mhm.
cleaning up after the cafeteria uses and such, but those spaces are underutilized in campuses, and the more inviting that we make them, the more they will be utilized by students.
and throughout the
That-
day, would they have access? Is that a,
That could
Is
be,
that a-
that would be something that's established by the school site.
Right.
But the answer to that is yes, it could be. But that was one of the things that rang true to me as I was walking around. I'm like, wait a second, there's kids in the cafeteria and they're actually studying, they're actually collaborating.
well,
They're actually,
it's a
working on things.
Starbucks on campus
it
where
was-
they
It
gravitate
was great.
gravitate to anyway.
It was great to see. So but if you create the place, they shall come, not to borrow that phrase,
Just as a reminder, we have a little mini model of this at New Technology High School already.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
One detail I wanted to know about with the cafeteria model, and I haven't spent a lot of time in our high school cafeterias up here. But in my mind, they're really loud and echoey. And I remember doing the tour of the ACMS new space, and they had soundproofing things to absorb that, which I think along with the furniture would go maybe in a cost-effective way, a long way to making it a place where you actually would want to go and study.
Yeah,
Um,
that would be part of when you sit down to do a modernization, that would be part of the process, would be to look at the sound. And there actually are architects, I didn't know this either, but they hire sound people to come in and actually measure sound and give you an idea around decibels. So it's all out there.
And one other question about, I loved the visual of that kind of reimagined cafeteria space. But there was a lot of open space there. And so I'm wondering about the tension between wanting to open that up, but we're hearing from Assistant Superintendent Pearson that the universal meals are really like our count is going up by the month, because our students and their families are now realizing they can rely on this and they're changing their habits. And so how is that going to work if there are more, which I'm assuming there already are more kids eating? So how do we make it spacious and like cafe-like, but we're feeding double?
Yeah.
kids?
So two things we would do is in addition to, we didn't get into the weeds on this, but with this presentation, but we would modernize the actual facility inside. And so in each one of the cafeterias right now, there's a staff room that's rarely used right now. The kitchen area actually needs to be redesigned to be more user friendly. So we would take those spaces, and those could be additional spaces. And then we would also open up parts of it so there's indoor outdoor experience. So that would allow for the increased participation by our students.
I like the idea of commons instead of cafeteria. So even moving towards a change of
Semantics.
just, yeah, because cafeteria just makes you think of food and then that's it. Like if I just want to study or hang out, then maybe that's not the space. And then obviously changing just with the furniture and all that could create that inviting and welcoming Starbucks on campus kind of thing. So and just having good Wi-Fi and AirPods sometimes is the way to go to block some of the noise. That's what I do even at work. So I really like that. I've always wondered, because I would during my time of doing a lot of outreach and connecting with folks, there was a lot of concern about all gender restrooms. And so just the example that you showed was very helpful. And in showing just what are the different options or ways of doing that visibility and openness of it. And even we know that we have situations in schools where kids are using the bathroom to do things that they're not supposed to be doing. And so the openness and visibility of it almost, it provides like a safety and security. I'll kind of take care of that because it's just so available and open, and at the same time you're private and you have your space to do what you got to do. So that was very helpful. I still would love to see more ideas on that and what that would look like. I did have a question because I know I'm trying to think in what ways, and I think that might be the architecture and design and all that, but is there anything in the education specifications that have to do with the environment and making sure that we are, I see the taking advantage of the lights, right? And more windows. And I like that because it makes any room look bigger when you can look outside. And I didn't think of it that way until right now, until you said, like, even if you have kids right outside, you could still supervise because there's the windows and there's that accessibility point of that. But just, and I know that saves, because, you know, even in our own homes, right? Like sometimes I turn on the lights, I'm like, why did I do that? There's enough lights in the room, and I turn it off. So is there anything else in the opportunities as we are looking at this in ways to, encourage that kind of thinking, right, with our students?
Yes, it is in that oftentimes comes in design, but it was right up front. It's in the design guiding principles, sustainability. That's what I would categorize that under. And it's both the long-term sustainability of our buildings and also how they are sustainable, utility and environmentally wise. We can certainly emphasize it more as well. It is one of the components that comes in during the design of projects. And in fact, in California, we have some of the strongest standards concerning that as you build new or modernize, those are things the state architect is looking at. Are we meeting those green standards? So California is really in the forefront of that with our buildings, and we can continue to emphasize it also in the educational specification.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful to specifically emphasize this. When I think of sustainability, of course, I think of the facility, the materials that are being used, financially sustainable and all of that, because that's like, it's top of mind. But I think on the environment side, yeah, that would be helpful. And I think there's some pride to also coming into a space or a room that has maybe the green seal that says it's green approved, right? Like it's green, where in the cafeteria, you're so used to it now, I think, but not in a lot of places where I'm starting to even struggle in places where I don't have the option to do compost and landfill. And when that's not there, I'm like, oh, what do I do with what I have? Because it's so nice to see that change, right? And so just little things like that, and even the things that I'm not even thinking of, right? That the future may bring. The other thing is, I love the open spaces and all that, but we've had a long winter, lots of rain. And so just thinking about how are the facilities, and again, I guess that comes with architecture and design, but just making sure that's because we can have a lot of outdoor spaces, but if it's cloudy and raining and cold and all that, what are some options to be able to continue to use those spaces if
and one of the, we do address that partially within the educational specification and indicating additional shade structures are necessary, both for dining and even for outdoor learning, because of our heated environment, particularly here in the Napa Valley. So we do consider that. And I think as it moves forward with the design professionals, it can continue to be, but it's an important part. I think you're going to hear a little bit about that too in these outside learning environments in the next presentation.
Mm-hmm. And just overall, I think the way that it's laid out and explained, it's so much, I'm able to absorb it a little bit better, the information, and just from the purpose and the guidance. So I just really appreciate that. And I'm guessing it's yes, the form, but it's a living document, right? That it's looked at annually. It's looked at like what is a best practice around that. But I know that's Mr. Pearson's full-time job to be thinking of this all the time and probably keeping a list of all the things that he needs to include in there. But I'm guessing it's more of a living document, right? That
It is a living
it
document.
must have
It's
some
something
kind
that-
of
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
something that you give to your design professionals. I indicate 3 to 5 years. Particularly if you're really addressing educational technology, because that is changing just so rapidly. We didn't really address that as much here. We said, it should be current educational technology, but it should be looked at like all of your kind of working documents and plans within a 3 to 5 year range. I was just working in a district where we adopted one in 2017. They're out with another tranche of bonds. We're kind of looking, is it still stand? Does it stand the test of time? Have teaching methodologies changed? Have your needs changed? And we're addressing it in that way supplementally. But it's good to have a core document from which you can work, just like a master plan for your district. It's an educational master plan.
I had a question talking about conditions changing. We now live in an era where there are lockdowns all the time. And so as wonderful as the open windows, natural light is, it's a safety issue to have that much exposure inside the classroom. So I'm wondering if we have any, if you have anything to say or to offer about how we find that balance, or what in a lockdown scenario would a teacher with an entire wall of windows do?
It is a balance issue. We do specify all windows should be able to be have blinds and should be able to be darkened quickly. You're probably putting in perimeter fencing now. Those types of things are occurring in school districts, and it is a balance. We certainly don't want to have no windows because that really affects educational learning. If you've ever been in a classroom that didn't have windows, you probably know that feeling. So there is a balance with that. And hopefully, we've reached some of that by providing for blinds. And then
I guess related to that is, I know we use a lot of the buildings as part of our fencing when you do the fencing. So I guess, would we then rethink how we want to use the fencing or the walls for the part of the fencing?
Yeah, I think it's, again, you want to strike that balance between the fencing versus the building itself. So you can still use the building. Maybe it doesn't have a bank of windows on one side, but the other 3 sides have the windows. So you still have that lighting, but the actual building presents that barrier for that. There's a lot to be learned at school sites, particularly in the Midwest and back east. We don't necessarily have the type of environment we have where we always can embrace our sunshine and embrace the climate that we have usually throughout most of the year. But there are some ideas that we can learn from what they've done, and that's one thing I have picked up over the time that I'm using putting up perimeter fencing, is how can we use the buildings to help with that. But it is that tension, Trustee Chu. You don't want necessarily windows facing out somewhere, and then someone could get in through the camp through the building that way. We have adopted a standard where most our new builds, our windows are not operable. So that helps us out with that as well too. And then just to build on what the question was asked around shade structures and things like that, all of our buildings, our new buildings have window coverings that can either be they're either hand operated, or some of them are remote operated, but typically most of them are hand operated, but they can be closed very quickly in the event.
So our new windows don't open?
Our new windows.
So they cannot be a source of fresh air?
That is correct. That is correct.
And that was a security decision? Is that?
Both security and the standard is about 3 inches that they can be opened up in most instances. And so they can't be just wide open as we normally are, because that's a part of a new regulation. So that's the improved efficiency.
But ours don't even do the 3-inch. We have ones that don't open.
That's our improved efficiency of our HVAC systems in recycling our air.
So I know that when I go into elementary school classrooms at Canyon Oaks, because I go there more often than any other, I see a lot of art that the teachers put on windows, partly because they don't have wall space. So how do you balance the need for certain wall space that they would love to showcase some of the students' work,
with blocking natural light, because that's all they have is the wall is a window. So how do you balance that? Do you like have extra windows on top or hang art from the ceiling?
Yeah, go ahead, Kathleen.
One of the things we specified is all tackable surfaces, so that the walls that are available, they're tackable surfaces. It is a tension that you'll always see, and it's usually one bank of wall or one bank of windows. The rest is able to display. But I would also say that natural lighting is really important to the educational environment. So it's that balance, and display of student art is also important to the learning environment. So it's that balance between those.
Trustee Waters.
Right. Thank you. This is really good. I love this. And I think the American Canyon Middle School renovation, frankly, that was a sterile environment. I guess we could call it minimalist. You know, it had that, I mean, my father's from South Dakota and I worked there for a year, and every time I stepped on it, I felt like I was back on the reservation. There was just something about it that was utilitarian in the extreme. And the renovation is incredible. It is incredible. Thank you for everything you did. It's just, I love the amphitheaters, and the students do too. And I think people don't understand, I don't think enough people understand how architecture can change behavior. And at American Canyon, oh my goodness. I mean, it's like night and day. Of course, it's nice not to have construction, but still, there's so many places for students to gather, you know, and when I was visiting there, we were there and just went everywhere. And one thing I noticed was the kids were sitting in all the little spaces that had been created to form groups, and nobody had their phones out. They were all talking to each other face to face. It was really amazing. And then today, I've been twice this week to Snow School. Snow School, before the earthquake, needed work. The earthquake came along and demolished it. And the new school, although if I could wave a magic wand, I would plant 4 40-year-old native oak trees there, you know, to give some more shade. But it is beautiful. It is such a delightful place to visit. And I was struck by the terrific behavior of all. It was reading day, and we went in and read stories to the children. And I was struck by how wonderful the behavior of all the children was. Their behaviors were so terrific. I mean, just they were polite, they were charming, and you know, they felt valued because of the school. This is the business we're in. We're not in the business to keep a bunch of teachers employed. That really is not it. I know, and I used to be a teacher, but we're here to improve children's lives. And at Snow School, we've got the all access lunch. We've got the beautiful new building. We have improved hundreds of children's lives, right? Just like that. I'm brokenhearted about the school bond, but 2024 is another year. Hope springs eternal. I like the flexibility in the science lab. That always did strike me as 75% of the time there was some wasted space there. So that's a great idea. I do think libraries are primarily for books, but yes, we need flexibility. And have you all ever been to the Davis High School Library?
No.
Anybody? I see somebody's head nodding over there. Nope, he's not nodding. Your farm's in Berkeley, right? Right. Okay. Yeah, I knew that was you. Okay. It's really I sent the superintendent when I was out there a few years ago some pictures. It's just an amazing place, and it encourages literacy. It makes being well read look like fun. And so maybe some of us should take a look over there. I like the idea about, you know, the flexibility and the thinking about the future uses of the building. And as for the all access bathrooms, restrooms, I try not to think about bathrooms at all since the TikTok challenge of a while back. But I was looking at those photographs and thinking it would really be hard for the TikTokers to pull that off. You know, if that could prevent a lot of vandalism. And you're right, it's happening everywhere. I mean, I was in New York, went to a restaurant I hadn't been to in about 10 years, and boom, yep, all access bathroom, didn't kill me. And I was fine. And it's it's something we need to think about, but it will have to be, explained. And I do think the younger children will get used to it, very quickly. And by the way, the awful things people do in bathrooms is generally vandalism. That is expensive. That's expensive for us. And, that needs anything that can lower that.
The other thing we hear about that it helps to prevent is bullying
Is bullying. Yep.
in those enclosed areas.
You're right there. Yeah. So yeah, there's a deterrent, when you're observed, you're less likely. So I've been seeing what we've done with our newer schools, but the ACMS remodel, I think, is one for the books. We really need to be proud of that.
And we built off of that in the educational specifications. It was done prior to it. So,
Yeah.
But it was, as you saw in the slides, it's an example of very good space and well thought out. So
Yes, I think we could call it austere. It was austere. Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you. This has been, I really wish more people could see this. Do we have a lot of people tuned in? We should need to close a school or something when we do these things, right? That usually gets them.
Put something controversial on the agenda.
That
Just
gets
one.
them
Okay.
wound up.
Clickbait.
Clickbait.
Right.
There's extensive research on, and I talk about it in the introduction, that the research shows a strong correlation between the health of children and the primary environments in which they spend their time, home, neighborhood, and school. So
Yeah.
it's the third environment that is really important.
Yep.
So I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
The all access restrooms, would they require more space because of a space efficiency loss due to urinals not being there?
I think that in the examples that I've seen, it's slightly more space because you're creating a one unit, whereas before you just had maybe a demarcation, but it may be offset by the space for the sinks is more like a hallway and not a larger space. So I haven't heard that it's significantly larger, but it may have an impact.
And then what is a flexible classroom versus a project learning area? Because they had different sizes and I don't know what those are.
Well, a project learning area, oftentimes we make larger. And that's because the type of activities that occur in that space require more space. So for instance, a project learning area might be for robotics. And I think we put that it was around 1,200 square feet versus a flexible classroom. It tends to be the same square footage of typical classrooms, say around 960 square feet. But the flexibility comes as we talked about in those science areas by being able to efficiently use the side part as well as having flexible furniture. So those are some of the differences. And then when you see into the spaces in the physical education area, they're significantly larger than that, but they're housing, so to speak, larger classes in physical education. So there's more space required for those students.
And what is a black box theater?
That was the example that I gave, and partially why it's called black box is it's black inside and it doesn't have windows, and it's used for performance.
Okay. And that's different from a regular theater because of the blackness?
Yes.
And the blackness and the intimacy in the intimacy.
small.
It's smaller. And so the intimacy that you can have. So you saw that picture, roughly about 100 people can be there and do that performance. So it permits that a little more intimacy if you wanted to have a production, a drama production, and 100 people there, and it's right there in front of you versus having on top of the stage that they have currently at the high schools. It could also be used as a practice area. It could be used, and it can be used for multiple disciplines. So it's not just drama. It could be choir. It could be band, and all different levels of choir, all different levels of band as well too. We were very impressed with one of the places we saw the Black Box Theater, which is something I didn't say this during the presentation, but I felt that was something to include in this particular one because it is definitely a need when you look at our current facilities for our performing arts. They need some help, and they actually need a lot more space as well too. And so part of that Black Box Theater would accomplish that with additional space for practicing and sectionals and things like that.
Makes sense. I just like that we're continuing to incorporate the success we saw at the American Canyon Middle School Commons with the outdoor amphitheater spaces as a standard for other places across the district. I think people will really enjoy those if they get them.
Okay, well, on that note, can I segue to the next one?
Yes,
That's
please.
great. That's a great segue. So, Jordan, if you could put up my slideshow and go to, I think it's slide 6. It says educational specifications outdoor. So, our journey with Kathleen was since August of 2022. But when I went to the outdoor educational specifications, that wasn't initially part of the journey. And then I realized about a quarter way through that there's this missed opportunity. If I don't bring this forward, I'm going to have a missed opportunity because of the need to be outdoors and the need to embrace our outdoors and allow for that learning to happen outdoors. So Devin Conway, who says there's the principal of and is a civil engineer with Verde Design, I reached out to him, and you're probably wondering, well, why did you reach out to Devin? Well, Devin and Wes were the two individuals who were instrumental in making sure that we have our new synthetic turfs at all of our high schools and middle schools, and we still have some to finish off as well too. And I reached out to him to say, do you also do outdoor educational specifications? And he said, heck yeah, we do. And I said, oh, great. Well, let's sign you up. So it's been a pleasure being able to work with them. And I feel very fortunate to have their level of expertise. And what you're going to find with them through their presentation as well is I know we like the outdoor amphitheaters at American Canyon Middle School and others, but there's so many other opportunities to have outdoor specifications and outdoor learning environments that they will share with you. As well as for some standardization of some of our things, just as our fencing and stuff like that, to adopt a standard on that is important as well too. So without further ado, I'll introduce Devin Conway and Wes Denton. Devin.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity. I would be remiss if I didn't just introduce Wesley Downing. He's a professional landscape architect and managed this project and did about 95% of the work. I'm just here to be pomp and circumstance and kind of go through the formalities of this. So kind of following up on Kathleen's conversation with you, I think I'm going to just build on that. The outdoors are really here to complement and build upon the indoor educational zones. They're complementary, and it is just an extension of where the kids are on campus, and to give them another opportunity in other areas of classrooms. And the outdoor classroom is one of the kind of the main points I'm going to hit upon, and certainly is probably the most important area. There's really 4 other zones we'll also talk about as well. Jordan, next slide, please. When we're looking at the outdoor spaces, what we're trying to create are spaces that not only enhance the student achievement, but are, they're spaces where they're growing, cognitively, motor skill learning. And this is throughout the outdoor spaces, not just the grass fields, not just the hard courts, but everywhere. And just they're in a multitude of forms. And these are areas where the children, be it, are the TK, K, all the way to 8th grade and the high schoolers, there are opportunities for them to be outdoors and to be out in nature. Some of it may not be considered nature, but they're out in an outdoor environment. And being outside really increases the mental, social health, and the physical well-being of these students. And it's sometimes underappreciated that is a real thing. And, to dovetail on Mike, he hit it hard, he hit it early and often. I'm going to follow up on it. The function of the school's students and the curriculum is what drives the forum. And you're going to see a lot of images in this, and they're all going to be dissimilar from one another because these outdoor ed specs are guidelines. There's no one, what you may have at American Canyon Middle in some of those areas may not work for another school based on the age groups and number of kids. What the curriculum there may be a little tangential and not the same focus. So we're providing some guidelines and really open up eyes with these specifications for the designers for any one project. Next slide. So the outdoor spaces, and Kathleen talked about this as well. We're looking for sustainability. Sustainability as a term has a lot of ways you could interpret that, but we're looking for areas that are, I think, when we specify materials, they are socially, environmentally thought through. We're not going to Asia or Europe to get a material when there is a locally sourced material 30 miles away that we have an opportunity. It may cost a little more, but I think those are things that we need to bring forward. We're looking for spaces that are environmentally friendly for the children, but are also going to be long lasting. And I like to say that these materials need to be sustainable in that they're as nice in 10, 15 years as they are when you ribbon cut that and you're there with the kids. To me, if they're not maintainable in these spaces that just make sense in the space they're going to, where they are and how they're going to be used, then us as specifiers and the people us doing these standards, and then the designers that come after us, we haven't done the best job we can do. And that's really important, is to look at these surfaces and materials. Next slide. So the 5 main areas that we looked at are and that we're focusing on are the outdoor classrooms, flexible learning areas, outdoor gardens, which we could consider like where you may have plants, vegetables, things like that, your outdoor eating spaces, your covered eating areas, playgrounds, the lower age groups, TK, kinder, first, second, third, and then our upper age, 4th, 5th, 6th playground areas, hard court spaces. And then looking a little bit on site furnishings, benches, things of that nature. And we hit it on it at the end of the Q&A, fencing. So next slide, Jordan. Thank you. One thing that actually, can you go back one slide real quick, Jordan? One thing that caught me when we did some white walks with Michael is this slide is at a school in Los Gatos, an elementary school. And you have some schools that have shown their age, so to speak, but they are, naturally beautiful. And, I think it's, I would say almost all your spaces are gorgeous. They're just a little, they need to be reimagined, would be a way I would say it, because the bones are there. They just need a little TLC. You need to probably reimagine how they could best be used, and then have them improved based on the reimagineering so that they are available for our students in the future curriculums for the next 20 to 30 years. Because when you pass a bond in the end of 2024, you need to have the ability to take that money and use it probably one time for, a few generations of kids. And I think that's really important. Now you can change, Jordan. Thank you. So the first area is outdoor classrooms, flexible learning. I think it's really important that we are remembering that these outdoor classrooms are important areas for us to, and opportunities for us to connect with nature. And a lot of that connection is emotional connection. We need to use our surroundings to really drive home that these are outdoor classrooms or extensions of the indoor classrooms. And we need to make sure that they are spaces to take full advantage of our unbelievable environments, notwithstanding the last few months. And so to create spaces that the kids and the teachers can use regularly. They're not going to be out there every day, but we need to have the ability for spaces that are flexible. Next slide, Jordan. The outdoor learning and the access to nature for our students, as well as our faculty, quite honestly, it decreases stress. It gets them relaxed. They're not wound up in a classroom. It has studies, repeated studies have shown, so, you know, this actually surprised me. I'm being a civil engineer, I'm not an educator, but the amount of benefit to mental health and academic performance is tangible. I was always out in fields as a kid playing soccer or kickball or things like that. That was my happy place. And for a lot of kids, that is. But even just being outside in flexible learning spaces where you're teaching when it's a nice day out, pull the kids out, those flexible spaces are invaluable. And I think that flexible learning and outdoor classrooms have an important place in the curriculum. Next slide. The studies have shown, not going to read this verbatim, but, it just increases the interest level in the children that results in the higher scores, better attendance. They have shown that children are not as apt to act out and have behavioral problems. And I think that if that can help them then with self-confidence and independence and these other lifelong skills as early as kindergarten and the elementary school age, I think that is transformative for our young children. And if the outdoor spaces can do that, that's really eye-opening. And that is something that's powerful. All these slides, these two are actually at high schools, Berkeley High School and College Park High School in Pleasant Hill. They're all very different spaces. They have different materials based on how they want these spaces to flow. Are they congregation areas? Are they also circulation zones? So, and some of it's fixed seating, some of it is not. And it's just open spaces where you're bringing out some of these new pieces of furniture. They're all modular. It's great. All those things, those under the oak tree and a couple slides before, they're lightweight natural wood that's hollowed out stumps. And so they're natural materials, they're locally sourced in Northern California, and they're just basically weatherproofed so they don't have rot and mold and things like that. But these are things that two kids can move around, the teachers can get and use different kinds of materials. There's a lot of really neat materials out there that, again, we're not telling the next round of designers and specifiers what to use. That's up to them. I think that's also where the educators are going to have some input, and that's really exciting. Let's see. Next slide, Jordan. I think I talked about it. We're extending the indoor classroom to outdoors. I think it's important in some of these spaces to have rooms where teachers can have joint classes. So they're big enough for 1 to 2 classes. Some schools are going to have different class sizes based on the age groups. But I think, again, having these quote amphitheater spaces, American Canyon Middle, is a great opportunity. That could have, one class that takes a small section. There could be 2 classes out there at both ends. There could be, some level of a grade, retreat or some sort of, get together. So there's just and obviously during recess, lunch, kids are just hanging out and having a social time. That's great. Next slide, Jordan. The seating can be, there's a lot of areas where they're open. Well, that's not really an outdoor classroom. Well, we want it to be flexible so it can be, depending on how it wants to be used. There could be some performances, things like that. I think so having a combination of spaces where they have fixed seating and flexible space that's just open where chairs can be brought out, tables, benches, things like that are important. Something that really needs to be thought through, and this is something we've talked about in the ed specs, is you need to make sure where these are located. As Kathleen said, outside the classrooms is important to have these little zones. Some of them are probably going to be a little further away from a classroom. Like this is outside the main quad at Concord High School, but it's a big open space. It was underutilized. It was had good shade, but it was basically mud. So basically, by creating seat walls and putting in, decorative pavers in the school colors, it's now an inviting space. It doesn't cost a lot. You already had the trees there, but just again, reimagining the space just a little bit, not a lot, to really create a new area to use. But having power is really important, depending on if you want to have laptops, things like that out there. Make sure that it's near restrooms and, drinking fountains, especially for the younger ages, is really important. Next slide, Jordan. And there's another examples, obviously that's American Canyon, but also kind of the fixed seating and the modular seating comes in a variety of elements. These kind of the top slides kind of just got some elliptical kind of things, but they're very lightweight. And they're institutional grade, shall we say. And that's at a middle school in Concord. Again, it's an open space. You're making classrooms by site furnishings, and they're kind of in this administrators and the teachers, they had a little stakeholder group, and they had like a dozen brands, and there's like, well, I've never seen that at school. I want that. And it's something that's been very well received. Next slide, Jordan. One thing actually on the last slide, Jordan, just walk it back one real quick, please. The surfaces out there, a lot of these materials we're seeing are concrete for good reason. They're going to last 30 to 50 years. They're easy to clean. They don't break down very easily. American Canyon has synthetic turf. There's a lot of different types of synthetic turf. It's a nice surface. It is actually very, quote, green, and that doesn't take any water, doesn't take any fertilizers. If you spec the proper materials with natural infills and things like that, they're much cooler, and they're environmentally friendly, and without certain materials in them, they're fully recyclable. They're actually now starting to come to be cradle to cradle types of materials, which is a kind of an international certification of basically something that's fully recyclable. Next slide. Thank you, Jordan. The outdoor gardens. So one thing I think is really important with the outdoor gardens to talk about is it should be part of your district adopted curriculum. And I think if it isn't there, it's going to be there. It does provide a lot of opportunities for kids. But it is part of the curriculum. It should be. How nature happens with decomposition, the nutrient cycles, how plants live and die, and how they recycle, the composting, and how to use water efficiently. These are all things, obviously, I think a couple people in the Napa Valley know about with the viticulture industry and all that. Well, these are opportunities that we have with our students. And when we visited the campuses, a lot of them have that. I think some of them could be enhanced with some of the amenities, but the opportunity is already there. It's being utilized, and I think we can enhance upon that. And just getting I'm a civil engineer. I like to get my hands dirty. That's why I don't wear my writing room all the time, because I'm getting my hands in mud and all that, being an engineer. I think that is wonderful for kids to do that as well. And I don't know too many children who don't want to get their hands dirty. It's a really exciting part of the curriculum. And learning with nature and the earth sciences is something that is a really important thing. It's part of the next gen science standards, and they, they have these core ideas of, they have, it's called 3 dimensions, but it's core ideas, science and engineering practices, and cross-cutting concepts. It's it's much more deep than I can really explain it, but this is one of the core elements, these outdoor gardens, that really ties almost all of that together. Next slide, Jordan. Some of the things we look at from a standard standpoint, having enclosed spaces, accessible surfaces. So children, whether or not they can run around or they can wheelchair out, having planters that are at wheelchair accessible heights and different heights is really important. Make sure that they are institutional grade. We typically recommend corrugated metal with soft edges or rounded edges, so they're safe, but they're indestructible. The wood, while natural, does tend to break down and deform with all different kind of plants, things like that. And it's really important to have storage for the equipment. If there's a community component, that's a different animal. And a lot of these schools do have a community component, at least that we have designed. And that's something that, again, the district, if you're going to embrace that, there's some different just things to think about in terms of security, the fencing. Are there going to be different storage for the faculty, the teachers, and the students versus, quote, a community garden element? But one of the things when we walk these sites with Michael is the community involvement in your campuses. These are community assets. You ask the public to support and pass a bond. Well, you have spaces, quite frankly, in some of your properties, you have expansive grounds, they're underutilized. And they're very difficult for Albert and your district maintenance staff to maintain. If somehow you could have a strategic partnering with some of the community, and there are opportunities to have community gardens and things like that, that's a win-win for everyone. You don't necessarily have to maintain it all, and you're creating a partnership that I think from a strategic standpoint makes a lot of sense, because you don't have to maintain all these spaces. So, those are just things as you look at from a curriculum standpoint, it can really be overreaching much beyond just the students and the teachers. Something to think about. Next slide, Jordan. Outdoor eating spaces, the covered eating benches and things like that. You see them all the time, and they're usually very institutional, but a lot of times they're afterthoughts. And you look at the space that was created at American Canyon Middle, and you can kind of see opportunities. And I think that's something from a specification standpoint we looked at. Next slide. Certainly, they should be centrally located, especially if you have on-site kitchens and food prep areas. Need to be sized. This is actually an example of one in an elementary school in San Jose. It wasn't sized very well, and they outgrew it. Luckily, they had some mature oak trees and crepe myrtles that surrounded it. So they had excellent shade that was natural, much beyond it. But when they have full recess and lunches, they have 2 different lunch periods. They can't all fit anywhere near just that one covered area. So I think the sizing to accommodate this needed student count per seating is really important. These are all portable benches, but some of these materials we want, you're going to want them to have more fixed. I think the last bullet is actually my most important one. We're seeing a lot at schools is, again, a curriculum-based item where we're educating the children on reusing our finite resources, be it food, our plastics. I mean, you hear about microplastics and things like that. How can we do smart, tangible, recycling, and be it food waste, composting, materials that can be recycled, some that cannot. And that's an education component that we see more and more frequently as part of the outdoor eating spaces through signage and things of that nature, food recovery programs. Again, educating about products, the cradle to cradle products and what they mean, and make sure that, packaging, that the water bottles, everyone's using water bottles and bottle fillers. Why did that come out? Because we're trying to reduce that plastic bottle right there. And I use those plastic bottles all the time. My daughter won't touch those because it's like, they basically are taught that it's bad for the environment. So everyone has those now. And we have the bottle fillers. We rarely even specify drinking fountains anymore because everyone just has a running around with their bottle fillers on their backpacks. So that kind of education, I think, is important as part of the outdoor eating spaces. Next slide. Playgrounds. This is what a lot of people think about, at least historically, on outdoor education and just the areas, go out and play and recess. I think something that I remember here, now I gotta look at my notes, is that there's, how does the play element, develop and, and grow our social emotional well-being. And a lot of it, you look at this and it's just people running around, but you're learning how to interact with each other. People of different social and economic backgrounds, different races, different creeds. I mean, it kind of goes to the all access bathroom. If we can get people starting at TK and going all the way through high school, you're not using playgrounds, but you're interacting in different methods. The diversity in play, it starts at preschool, and for this district at TK. And I think these playground areas are really important. They're serving, next slide, Jordan, they're serving multiple age groups, and they're trying to allow them to learn how to communicate with their fellow human beings and students, through this play and through the outdoor exercise, running around and just learning to solve problems a lot of times that are emotional. You don't know what everyone's dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Starts with the designing of the spaces and making sure that the spaces are safe, they're inviting, they're fun. And, for the district and the maintenance team, they're maintainable. They're looking great 15 years, and they are practical, and they're still relevant. A lot of times you see these pieces of equipment that they're barely relevant on day one, and that's something we want to avoid. And that's what some of these specifications are geared to make sure we don't fall into that pitfall. Next slide. Again, durability, easily maintained, surfaces that can be easily cleaned. We've obviously used 1 or 2 bottles of disinfectant. That's something that's really important, is to have easily clean surfaces that are durable, things that are easily replaceable. Adaptive equipment also is easily damaged. And so having adaptive equipment that serves the need of children in need of adaptive equipment, like adaptive swings or buddy swings, while important, we need to make sure that they're also institutional grade. Allowing kids to be able to play with able-bodied children that aren't so, such as, maybe not every merry-go-round is going to have the ability to have a flush entry. We've done several of those for all access adaptive playgrounds, so that, for the first time ever, someone who's been in a wheelchair all their life can play with their 2 able-bodied children, their brothers and sisters. I think that's a really powerful opportunity. You see that more in the municipal side, but it is something to consider as you do playgrounds. Sometimes they cost considerably more, sometimes they don't, depending on the piece of equipment you look at. But I think that's something to look at, and we have touched upon in these standards. Next slide, Jordan. Age-appropriate play areas, making sure that the materials are suitable for the space. The top slide was actually something in Saratoga that was a must-have for the kinder area for these two classrooms. They wanted to have a space that had shade because the oak tree, where they had actually one of the prior photos you saw with the stumps, the oak tree and the outdoor classrooms behind you in the background, they wanted to have a sand play area where the oak tree was, but you couldn't tell it was a sand play area because it just had leaves in it year round. So we reimagined kind of a whimsical art fence to, allow all the trikes to do their Indy 500 every day around on the new concrete we put in. And then, shade was a really important thing. Putting in a sand play area that's at the edge of the synthetic turf so wheelchairs could get to it. Again, just thinking through some of the little devils in the details, but having these spaces that were just, before that was a bunch of electrical vaults and grass that never grew because it was a throughway for all the kids. Putting in synthetic turf and just relocating some amenities they had that weren't maintainable is just, again, an example of reimagining a space they really already had. It just wasn't something that was working for them. And again, I think that, the bottom slide, putting in tiles instead of pour in place surface, it's the same basic product, but now as something gets replaced, I can take out a panel, put it in, and it looks like it's brand new. Same material, just a different way of manufacturing and installing it. Next slide, Jordan. The blacktop, obviously every school has it for the most part. While asphalt is fine, it's economical. These are usually acreage size areas. I think there are different ways to guss them up, and there's some opportunities potentially to just reprogram the asphalt. I think synthetic turf, while you see it at high schools all the time, I think there is an opportunity for certain sports or activities where it makes a lot of sense, and it's about the same cost as concrete. So I think, again, we're not going to tell you what to put it all at any of your sites, but in these specifications and quote standards, we're putting in some ideas in there, and we think these are suitable options, arrows in the quiver, so to speak, for designers as they're meeting with the educators. We're trying to give them a head start. So as Michael, I think, properly said, if we're hired for something and we're not hitting the ground at ground zero, they already got a running start, which is saving you money down the road. Having these areas just to be durable, maintainable, accessible from the state architect's office, Title 24 in terms of having accessible paths of travel, be all inclusive to all the children whenever possible. Sometimes topography doesn't allow that in terms of getting from A to B easily, but we just try to have everything to be all inclusive in our components, whatever we're specifying, that they're adaptive, that you can use them at ground level versus up above. Sometimes that's not always possible. Basketball hoops are usually at 10 feet, but doesn't mean at, the elementary, we can't have some at 8 feet or being modular so you can remove them. You don't want necessarily something that can be damaged, but those are the things we talk about in the specifications. Next slide, Jordan. Some of the things we looked at in terms of, this is not all inclusive. Obviously, there's a lot of like Foursquare, the education of having the world map or the US states are a lot of opportunities. But you already have kind of glossed on some of this, taking concrete and making it more of an institutional surface and then putting an acrylic color surface on it. Very inexpensive way of putting some school colors and school pride, and you don't even know it's concrete. It's a really inexpensive way of spending money for school pride, and you can do that with a lot of different materials. You can also look at it as you can have modular spaces almost by how you just do striping and things of that nature. Next slide. Other sports and activities, we've seen more and more often Gaga ball. Again, this is played basically on a dirt area, but you could put it on any surface. The sport itself is more about social interaction and fun than it is competition, although the kids in this slide may differ. We see a lot of small-sided soccer. Futsal is a tangent of that, but basically a walled soccer game. Those are modular. You're seeing that more and more often. Pickleball is great in that it's incredibly inexpensive. Takes a small space. One tennis court that you don't utilize, for example, at Redwood Middle School, could be converted to 4 pickleball courts. It's really inexpensive. You can do it on blacktop, just with some painted lines on American Canyon. You can put lines on, you can have portable nets. You can have them sleeved. You can just have them that come in and they expand out. They're really inexpensive and it's a great form of physical education. You see it a lot of times even at the high school levels. They'll play, pickleball before it was, different, but the pickleball is now the thing that is kind of taking over here, the battle between tennis players, pickleball. Outdoor exercise stations. That could be an example of that was what Kathleen showed was outside the wellness center. And it's just an open grass area where you can do plyometrics, outdoor yoga. I mean, it could be fixed equipment. So there's a lot of different, depending on your budget and what the curriculum wants at that school. Outdoor running paths, just mileage club, things like that. It doesn't take a lot to take an open space that's already there that may already be paved and creating something that just feels more professional and is much safer usually on the kids' bodies as they're developing, especially skeletal wise. Next slide, Jordan. Last 2 categories really small, just site furnishings, looking for flexibility in terms of different materials. Some are incredibly institutional grade, like the concrete bench on the bottom left that we saw at Napa Junction. So the other images again are pretty institutional grade. They just have a lot of different flexibility in spaces, depending if you want a natural material, color, things like that. We're not going to say what you need to have. We're just try to give some flexibility. I think having shade where you don't already have natural shade is always a good thing. I'm always wearing a hat. Kids don't always wear hats, so they need to have shade somewhere. And also just having, the play equipment either through athletics and recreation as well as a playground. We touched upon that in the ed specs. Next slide, Jordan. Last component was fencing. You talked about security. Obviously, the health and safety of our kids is probably numero 1, and then the educating of them is very close 1A. Making sure there's a balance between inclusivity and welcoming of the community, but also having the ability to secure our children is important. That coming into the central corridors, single point of entry at the main entrance of the school, obviously has been a focus of the district. Looking at materials is something we looked at and how that is done. Next slide, Jordan. That is ornamental fence. So one of the things we looked at is at the front, ornamental iron. It's really expensive. Using in certain pieces makes sense. And then we looked at standards of having chain link, a tighter weave than you normally see, what's called an anti-climb or Caltrans mesh, 1-inch mesh. So you can't climb it. It's much more durable as well, albeit you pay for it, but it's something that can last a long time versus a typical chain link fence. So looking at these different materials, securing the campus core from the areas that communities using more after hours, namely the play fields and maybe the basketball courts. I think every school is probably gonna be a little different, but we looked at the standards on that as we walk through these sites. And again, providing limited points of entry, not only for the school, the main campus, but as well as the community spaces, namely the play fields, they're used after hours. And I think that is it. One more slide? I don't think so. Nope, that's it. So I thank you for your time. Hopefully I didn't take too much. I tend to drone on from time to time, but. Yeah.
Guys are going out on the road when, if we do issue a bond and you're going to be out there selling these concepts to the public.
I mean, I thought that was one of my takeaways is I see a lot of, see stuff at the elementary school, do work at I was at Stanford last week. So I see things at all the different age groups. And one of the takeaways I had as I was walking the sites is they're gorgeous. They're just, I mean, honestly, you have some amazing natural, I mean, the trees you have, the layout, the hills. Just, I think some of these spaces just need to be, I think, obviously money solves a lot of problems, but just getting the administration and the teachers to really provide some input in how they would use the outdoor classrooms first and foremost, and then how the kids use spaces now are different than when these schools were built, many of them 30, 40, 60 years ago. They need a reset.
Well, you mentioned, in the first presentation, you mentioned the importance of flexibility. And in your presentation, you showcased what that flexibility can look like with outdoor spaces. And to me, that's something that not only is it obviously important for kids and teachers, but it becomes a part of our community. I mean, education is a cornerstone of our community, but these spaces are too. And so it just shows the presentation allows us to use our imagination as to what those spaces could be used for. And
Yeah,
so,
Trustee Jankowicz, I want to build on that because that was one of my ahas as I was working with Devin and Wes and going around and watching them look at our spaces. And honestly, I can still visualize them kind of looking around going, this is a really nice space, but it could be repurposed in such a way that would be so embracing to the school community. And we talked about this one idea about creating like school field trips actually on your campus, where you can create areas where there's, succulents or there's, pollinators or just different ways that they can create these opportunities for students and go on like a mini field trip just on your campus alone. But we have been, myself included, being sort of guilty of doing these kind of cookie cutter, like, okay, here's your playground, here's your asphalt, and here's your watercress, couple acres of grass. And that's great. However, again, if you think about next time you're on a school campus and you're looking at the elementary students or the middle school students, really look at how much they use of the green grass. It's nice to have, but could it be reused in some ways like we're talking about, and actually maybe be more environmentally friendly where we're not, mowing it, fertilizing it, watering it, all those sorts of things, but we may still have to do some of that maintenance. But it actually has an educational component to it. So that was one of the things for me that was a huge takeaway in speaking with Devin and Wes in this process that we've gone through, is that we've missed some opportunities to really embrace the environment and utilize the resources that we have right at us. And we have some fantastic sites, as Devin has mentioned. So anyways, I just wanted to mention.
Yep. Now I think, as you go away from the grass, the concrete, and the buildings, you need to understand as you develop something to have it sustainable or maintainable, you have to have a commitment for these outside the box ideas that a garden stays what you envision the garden to be. There needs to be a commitment at the administrative and faculty level to keep it up. A sensory garden based on if you have an autistic component of a program, that's invaluable. But someone needs to take care of a sensory garden. It may not be something that a union-based maintenance team knows how to take care of it. Well, we could teach them. There's classes for that, but there needs to be, I think you need to have buy-in on things like that.
Right.
So it's, if they're not interested in taking care of something, it probably is not going to get taken care of. I think that's part of that education actually, is just making sure that we can keep something from setting up a standard that can be successful, not just we can hire a contractor to build it. That's not a successful contract, but it's not a successful program or design if it can't be implemented and then maintained. And I think that's something that we don't always remember as design professionals.
Well, as for gardens, we can make our lives easier and plant California native plants. And you'll be happy to know that I will be at American Canyon Middle School tomorrow running a worm composting workshop for the science class. Yes, for their garden. Red wigglers. I can't wait.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate this direction, and I appreciate, Mike, you adding this and having the sort of bigger picture vision to understand that this belongs in this space and with this set of specifications. And I'm really heartened to hear that there's a lot of data to back us up when we talk about the importance of kids having time outside for their physical well-being, but also for their mental health. And as a former teacher, I appreciate you saying that when the teachers get to go outside and use those outdoor learning spaces, it's good for their mental health and well-being too. So it's a win there.
I wonder if you could elaborate more. I'm not sure quite who can answer or it's finding that what is that balance of our spaces in our schools, because first of all, that's the priority is that they're ready for the kiddos and the teachers and the staff, right? However, a lot of our schools are the only open spaces in various neighborhoods. And the school kind of turns into a park because of these amazing opportunities where if you have, it's heartbreaking to be able to think of a kiddo looking through the fence and not be able to use the equipment or the play area simply because it's end of school, lock it, skate it, you can't have access to it anymore. So I wonder what are some of the specifications and guides to find that balance, because it is used by families, and even our youth of our teenagers just hang out there. And sure, there might be in the swings where the little ones should be and not them, but they're hanging out and talking. And I find that to be more healthy than any alternative.
What we tried to do at each one of our campuses is to still provide that access to the community, to the play structures and to the play fields. In most instances, we've been able to accomplish that. In a couple, we haven't. And it's just kind of how this campus is situated, how the buildings are situated, and where the playgrounds are actually situated. Napa Valley Language Academy is an example of that. Where that playground was located, I could not figure a way to make sure that the school had access for it. It was safe for the students to use, but it also provided community access. So when if we were to pass a school bond, and we will pass a school bond next time, we'd had visions of moving that playground to another area. So there was that community access, and then we could adjust the fencing. So it does have that opportunity. I do believe, though, that some of the elements that Devin brought up in this presentation, though, we would have to decide, like, is that a community access point, or is that more of a school access point? So I think back to the area where you saw the sandbox and the area for the TK and K. And I would argue that that's more for the kids and for the school site. And that needs to be, sort of set off itself separately, because that's more of a learning and an extension of the classroom opportunity, which we don't normally make, we don't make the classrooms accessible to the outside public. But the play structures and the play fields in some other areas, I think we would. And we have as a practice to try to institute that as much as we possibly can for that very reason you're talking about.
Yeah, and I wonder what, also in specifications, especially on the garden one, right? It sounded to me that this embracing the idea of partnering and, but sometimes with partnerships come volunteers and a coordinator and just coordinating programs like that. For a community garden, it's just, it can be sometimes even more work than what, and then the sustainability is gone, right? So I know there's a balance there. I also went, so that makes me think of these open spaces that you have, right? You have great ideas of the tree trunks and right, yeah, it's very green and right. The little hobbits, yes. The little pebbles that look like seating, that seating areas and all that. I wonder if there's also anything around specifications of partnering with, and it makes me think of cities, right? The cities, you're talking about the gardens or spaces like that, or if it's a park, or I mean, I know it's much more complex than that, but I wonder about art also in those open spaces, because you walk around downtown, or you have the trails, the Vine Trail, and but again, in kind of the sense of equity, sometimes our kiddos, the only time there are in areas where they see a lot of this nature or parks or play area or art may be again at school is their safe space. So any ideas that have been shown about like good partnerships with cities with art at school sites?
Yeah, so let me, one thing that we're still working on putting in at American Canyon is where you have the amphitheaters, the smaller ones, we wanted to create some sort of, I say barrier, but way to kind of shield if you have a class out there, there's not that interaction directly behind that. And we envision that as some like, maybe not exactly this, but if you think of Hogwire that has pretty big squares, to where you could actually display student artwork or other pieces or other types of artwork around. And that would be something that we could look at at elementary campuses as well as fixed art pieces, if that's what, the school sites desire. Because you're exactly right. There are opportunities where it would be nice to have some artwork. Obviously, all this comes with an expense, and we'd have to figure that out in looking at that. But I personally like the idea of ways that we can embrace it where the kids could actually have some of their artwork, albeit it has to be obviously weatherproof to a certain extent, that could be displayed out there for use, and it could, be turned over periodically as our classes do different types of projects. So. Okay.
Think of an example where the Teen Connect had an art grant, a community grant, and the local teens made it was like a mental health stepping stones to wellness or something. So the kids each made a round mosaic thing with a really positive message. And then, I mean, unfortunately, we couldn't keep them all together to make an actual like pathway of positivity or whatever. But each one then went back and was placed at their site. So, there's one mosaic stone somewhere at Napa High that my kid worked on. But that kind of partnership to contribute to the beautification, because there's sort of a lot of opportunities for that.
And if you create the spaces for that type of project, then it just sort of has it manifests itself. But you have to have those spaces. You have to have that design thought in your head, and you have to be able to be intentional when you go to redesign and repurpose your outdoor spaces.
Yeah, the program side of it. So we can have all these ideas, right? It's all great, but the implementation and program side of it, then that's a whole that's a whole conversation, different one, right? Because
and not the purpose of this study session.
Correct, right? That then has to link to instruction and all of that, and that is a whole different conversation. But I guess what this does is just it's saying it offers the opportunity for that and that kind of alignment, and we want to make sure that we're embracing as much as possible all these opportunities that can happen now. With some, like you said, just for some of our
the spaces of flexibility so that our docents that may come on campus or what have you, they have the ability, they have the canvas to show that those kinds of elements out. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember what Kathleen, right, started with around form follows function. And so we have a lot of decisions to kind of integrate, right? So it's not that this is really, I think the way to think about it is that, yes, of course, if there's a revenue infusion, hopefully from the community around a future school bond, it's important that we're ready with specifications to rise to that occasion and not lose time and not to have to be at the will, like Mr. Pearson said, of designers, as we laid out potential projects in a bond campaign, for example. We're already ready, right, with the specifications. And the other opportunity is if instruction, because the form follows function, if instruction comes up with some programmatic signature program that they want to create, and we have, revenue streams to support facilities that would then, support that program, then we're also ready. So, it has those different purposes. It's really about facilities being ready for when the appropriate strategic opportunities emerge programmatically and financially.
Financial standpoint, I think that's really important, but I also think from a community understanding of the work, it's really important as well.
And you can also, I think it's important to note, as I've been listening, and I think it's been alluded to in different ways, is that, we do run a risk when you have these educational specifications. I think it was Kathleen who mentioned a master plan, right? And if we can remember in 2016, a master plan was used and shopped and kind of, presented on, and it caused a lot of misconceptions around what the district would actually end up executing on. And there became a very large gap between what community expectation was and then what the district actually implemented. So we have to use this tool strategically, right?
What could be as opposed, but not
Right.
actually in a document that is representative of
Right.
what we are going to do.
Well, I would argue that it's not really an external tool.
Right.
It's not a marketing tool. It's not what we go out and kind of market with, because this is really an internal tool for the staff to be ready for those programmatic and financial opportunities that'll emerge, whether they're on the program side, whether they're on the revenue generation side. Because if not used appropriately, they will replicate the scenario that was created in 2016 with the school bond. So we want to be cautious. This is about the board supporting the idea of school planning and construction and facilities being ready and prepared proactively, not, reactively, when those opportunities emerge, right? So it's exciting to see all that potential. It's always exciting to see what the future holds. And we have to balance that and pair that with remembering what the purpose of this is and how we have to use it strategically so that we don't contribute to any misconceptions in the community.
So I have some concern about including community gardens or gardens of any type in our standard here, only because currently gardens are not part of our curriculum. That's not something that is standard across our school sites. And to the extent that we choose to go in that direction, I feel like that's something that really needs to be discussed by instruction. And so I question, have we even brought that to their attention at this point?
Yes, Trustee Gracia, we have actually brought that to their attention. And we actually, as a system on the maintenance and ground side, are being responsive to our current school sites, some of them who are looking at instituting school gardens. And the reason we're being responsive to that is actually, as Devin mentioned, it is in the next gen standards, particularly K2 standards. And so we would like to see the gardens become a portion of the school climate and the school environment, provided it's going to be embedded in the curriculum, because in the past that hasn't been the case. It's been a club or a project or something like that, and then it goes well for a while, and then it deteriorates. The other thing that we'd like to see it tied into is not a direct linkage necessarily from a product that is grown to then going into our food service program. But for example, they grow tomatoes and the kids maybe try tomatoes that are being, the food service programs offered. If they can, there's enough that they can sell, that they can go there or taste test or do those taste testing events, so much the better. But there's also that linkage to our NOSH program that we're looking for as well too. We're moving slowly on this and on that, because I also concur with where you're saying about some of the concerns in regards to the community gardens out there. And just for the record, we're not looking at the community gardens right at this point. That potentially could be something if we choose to, but we are looking more towards the school gardens and that linkage to the students in the curriculum.
Yeah, so I guess right now, as I see the garden programs, they're all site specific and very much, not across the district. And whatever this site does, that site doesn't necessarily do it. There's no standardization here. So if that's what we're talking maybe about getting into, I think that's a much bigger discussion that we need to have around curriculum implementation and some of those topics that this feels too early to include without that, to me.
100%.
Can I respond?
Yes.
So I think that President Gracia, I think that requires us to have a mindset shift. It goes back to what is the purpose of this tool? So I actually want to respectfully disagree around not including them. What you're describing as our current reality is 100% accurate. I mean, we see it. If you go to schools, what he just described is absolutely our current landscape around school gardens. And at times it can be frustrating because you see remnants of ones that were existent in the past that have, withered away. You see ones that are really active at this moment in time, but when parent X goes away, it's going to become a remnant. Like we all see that. And so you have characterized it accurately. The reason I think, despite that being our current landscape, that it's important to include this is because it goes back to, this is not what we are going to do, it's what we could do and what we need to be programmatically and financially prepared for when the opportunity emerges. So if the opportunity, let's say, State Superintendent Tony Thurmond all of a sudden puts some opportunity for there to be a large scale, in response to the mental health crisis, in response to wanting to get kids science ready, some huge initiative and funding stream programmatically around school gardens. Okay, great. Instruction is going to go to work. They're going to design a program. There's going to be the instructional outcomes of that program. And now facilities is ready to potentially create, again, the form is following the function, is ready with a standard that we can then consider versus us reacting to that opportunity that emerges from the state, for example.
I understand having a standard in the way that you describe it, but this is sort of being put out as an expectation that if we're building a new facility, we would be looking for this, and this to be included in some way potentially, right? Like,
yeah, if that
so
was
Pick and choose.
yes.
So
Yeah, we would pick and choose. It's not saying that if there's a new facility, yeah, it's not, that's a really good, I think, scrutinizing question. That's a really good clarifying question. If we go to build a school or modernize a school, it doesn't mean that that piece of the puzzle of all possible ed specifications would necessarily be implemented. Because if there's not a program to support it or personnel or instructions like, we're not doing that for the next 10 years, here's why, then we probably wouldn't include it. But if there is an opportunity, we want to have that standard to kind of grab from, if that makes sense. So I think that's a really great clarifying question that you just asked.
yeah, so I guess my then fallback would be, unless we have some sort of programming for this purpose, we would not then build any gardening areas.
That's correct. I'm a big believer in the form. The function needs to follow the form needs to follow the function. Excuse me. I'll get those backwards on that. Yeah, I'm not a believer in, and I don't think anybody is a believer in saying we're going to put it down and then just hope it magically happens, because we have some instances of that, and it's not what we strive to do.
And Mike is, Assistant Superintendent Pearson is incredibly conscious of that. I mean, in fact, he's constantly ringing the fire bell around, facilities can't take the lead on this. Facilities can't take the lead on this. And so you all know the pace he likes to move at, and it's very hard to put anything in front of him to slow him down. However, he slows himself down around that piece because he understands, he's incredibly conscious. I think his team is incredibly conscious. I think the consultants are incredibly conscious of the fact that there's got to be that function laid out first. And we run a tremendous risk if facilities doesn't have that consciousness and awareness, and they're dropping form everywhere and then function is expected to follow. That's actually the purpose he's actually gone
Right.
down this road. So thank you for bringing that up.
I guess the other part of my concern is the community garden aspect. We have tried that at various campuses and it's been an administrative nightmare. So I do have very serious concerns in that area as well.
Yeah, the question, the example that that Mr. Conway provided you was just that, an example. That's all it was. I could see truthfully other uses of our facilities that you may or may not like as well too. In all honesty, I think what I would want our board to look at, and again, it's when you go out to our facilities and you see these acres and acres of grass, is what could we do? You know, and what is it used for, and what could we do? And it may be, there may be this way to do a community garden and it makes sense. And we can see it sustainable and we can see it not becoming an eyesore, and we can see it, or it may not, it may be something else. But to give you that example, just to provide just to get the juices flowing, and that idea of not saying like we have to keep all our fields green. We certainly have some need to keep our facilities green for the purposes of using it for outdoor recreational sports and things like that. But again, it's we have it, and we are one of the largest landowners in the Napa County. I'll just say that.
I think another thing that your question really has me thinking. And I think another thing to consider and think about is you saw as they laid out I'm sorry, I have to look at my notes to use your words, the applied science and technology at the secondary level, and talking about kind of connecting facilities to industry and thinking about career readiness and workforce readiness. And they talked about the viticulture and the biotechnology, which is very relevant to our industry in the Valley. And so if that might be some, kind of culminating experience that becomes a possibility at our high schools, then we might think of an opportunity that emerges where we're creating a vertical alignment all the way up to that. And so we think about how we leverage the space on elementary campuses and the space on middle school campuses to help create that that signature experience at the high school, if we're really going to become a system that is more aligned with what industry is in our own backyard, which happens to be, viticulture, the wine industry, hospitality, and tourism. And so we want to kind of think about all of those possibilities in our future. Because remember, it's very aligned. It's about strategic foresight. It's about what we're talking about with a future strategic plan and looking at, visioning for the next 10 years. Mike's actually Assistant Superintendent Pearson's team is ahead. They're kind of leading the way and having some strategic foresight around what are all the facility education, the facilities that can support future educational opportunities in the next 10 to 15 years. Yeah.
Concept to keep at the forefront, keep front of mind as we consider the possibilities.
Yeah, today it feels like this is where instruction and programs intersect with our facilities, and having the planning and not get to a point where we have to react. And now what do we do? Yeah.
And
I
President
think
Gracia brings up a really great point. Like these haphazard, if we're going to take the community garden piece as a way of like, that's, at many of our elementaries, that's like a roller coaster ride in terms of implementation. Like, if we have strategic foresight, strong instructional planning, and good financial planning, and now we see that this is like a strategic focus for us programmatically as a district, then all of a sudden those gardens become something completely different. They have a purpose, they have the district backbone and anchor behind them, and they're culminating to, they're part of a culminating program and experience at a high school.
I think the community gardens
That's
are
different than
but
random community gardens.
It's such a good example and question to kind of highlight what we're talking about. And I think that's what so yeah, I also appreciated that, because as board members, our role is to know where do we come in and at what point, right? And so I think that question helped clarify, even for me, where are we in that phase of the work, right? And right now it's, yes, it's the concept, it's just being strategic about it and the foresight. Yeah, when you were talking about the garden beds and all that, I remember when I went back to our alma mater, UC Davis, go Aggies, had started the first, it had just added maybe 10 years ago or so, the first new major in like 30 something years or 40 or 50 years. And it has to do with environmental and sustainability sciences. And so it's coming, right? And we're it feels like we're a little behind, right? But just like that, it had taken even then, I think 10 or 15 years to even just open and have that new major. And so it feels that kind of sense of if you're going to do that, do you have the facilities for it, right? Do you have the, and then hopefully, not hopefully, we will have the money to do it.
Well,
I know.
in the past, I think the gardens have been it's sort of the old story of this school district, really. It's been there've been an enthusiasm, but what we need is if we're going to do it again, it has to have a real purpose. And I think they do. I think they do. There's science, it's a wonderful way to teach science. We saw this when we went to Puebla Vista.
And to
They're wonderful presentations. Yeah.
And I would argue, I'm sorry, Dr. Massetti, I know I'm not supposed to disagree with the superintendent, but I would argue that just because we didn't have kind of a systematic operation and that we weren't necessarily aligned, the organic start of these gardens was done to prove to support a programmatic purpose. And there was not alignment across, but I don't think that negates the importance of the learning. I think it was biology. I think it was climate change. I think it was the pollinators. I mean, it was all of these different environmental studies. And so I understand at a higher level of thinking of where we ultimately would like to go, but I want to honor the fact that on these individual sites, these gardens really did serve a purpose. And even if that purpose was an understanding of what can grow from dirt and seeds, I think that's a valuable part of education. And so, yes, conceptually, I understand, but I don't think that it was so haphazard that these individual gardens did not have value at that time and didn't serve a purpose. Even if during COVID, and I talked to one of the moms that, was in charge of a garden there, it was difficult because not everybody was there. And there was kind of some of the gardens got lost, but I just don't want to diminish the importance of what these gardens served for their school communities.
So I'm going to take us from the weeds to back to the forest. Relating it to, I know many of you have mentioned a possible bond pursuit in 2024, and of course there's a lot of discussion and decision making that needs to happen before then. But just to kind of confirm, Assistant Superintendent Pearson, for example, we could just refer to the recent 2022 Measure A1. We've got projects coming in the bond that did pass in American Canyon, Measure A2. You referenced that you'll be using the ed specs for Measure A2. When we think of Measure A1, we had the athletic complexes, for example, those PE physical education spaces that Kathleen walked us through. So the idea would be when we re-engage around project prioritization for facilities and rework what a project list would be for a 2024 bond, for example, we would rely on these ed specs to, as we price out the projects, as we go to build out and select the projects. And then I would imagine, like, one thing that we didn't do in 2022, and we've learned from all of our mistakes, and we'll continue to do things better. We did a lot of great things, but it's always continuous improvement and learning, is that we may use these to create the visualizations for the community, not around everything that's in the ed specs, but around the projects that we choose, right? So if we're going to choose the physical ed spaces, if we're going to choose applied science and technology, you're going to use these specs to create the visualizations with all those specifications and get really explicit with the community. This is what we're going to accomplish with measure blah, blah, blah. Is it,
Yeah,
understand?
Dr. Mercedes, you're absolutely correct. And as slides were going through and the speakers were giving the information behind that, the slides, I was reading a lot of your faces and I could see that you went, oh, that's what it could look like. That's fantastic. And so to Dr. Mercedi's point, there's lots of things we did really well in campaigning, but one of the things we needed to improve was this visualization so that people could see tangibly see what we're looking to go after. It may not look exactly like that, but they have a way to go, okay, that's what they're talking about when they talk about a physical education space or a wellness center or applied science and technology, or refurbishing a library, or if we do all access restrooms, any of those sorts of things that we just presented to you, as well as the outdoor spaces that Devin also gave us ideas around. And again, just to, we referenced the American Canyon Middle School amphitheaters, but I think you got a taste of some different opportunities. And you may even say, wow, that would have been nice if we did that at the middle school. And you're right, it probably would have been nice if we'd done that at the middle school. But now we have some ideas that we can go forward to bring those to fruition to other sites as well too.
I also just want to illuminate how this helps with, as people change through the roles, right? Like to have this curated as people change the roles, Mr. Pearson may not be here forever.
Nope.
And the fact that we had, like in the past, we haven't had this information curated, like, and that's a real risky spot to be, because then you're kind of starting over whenever there's new personnel.
Yep.
In the way that you had to start, kind of from ground zero, despite long lasting leadership that was your predecessor, you kind of had to start from ground zero.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Dr. Mercedes. And it's not that it was bad. It was just that's what somebody knew. And that's what somebody was in the habit of replicating. And, I would like to say I'd stay here forever, but probably won't. And you probably don't want me to either. But the idea would be that whoever was to assume they have this, there's this document that they can reference. And it's something that can take to the next level. And instead of just saying, okay, this is in my head, this is what I want to do, this is the size, this is the scope of work, sort of things like that. That shouldn't be like that. It should be continually evolving with what's happening out there in the current trends. And as Kathleen mentioned, it's a document that should be revisited every 3 to 5 years and updated to make sure it meets our needs. So we can stay current, we can stay relevant, and we can stay ready to execute should there be a large infusion of money, bond, state, whatever it might be. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's pretty cool that we have this focus on these outdoor spaces, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's well proven that, those are benefits to mental health. And presently we're facing mental health challenges, right, for our students. And so that's one of the reasons I really like some of the things that we're seeing tonight, is because hopefully some of this can help with the mental health challenges that we are facing.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the possibilities as well too. Not that I don't like seeing some of the things we've done with asphalt and the painting that we've used on the asphalt and things like that, but I'd also like to see us going more towards the natural resources and providing those environments for students to, as you say, maybe decompress and enjoy the outdoor areas around that. Jordan, do you want to put my slides back up, please? I just want to ask the board if there's any other further questions before I move this, if it's okay if I keep moving you along. Okay.
Please do.
So we're going to go past. So next slide, please. So the next thing is for consideration is some direction from the board tonight, if possible, about adopting these as specifications for standards for NVUSD. This would be potentially at a future board, obviously at a future board meeting in either April or May as an action item to be adopted. But I wanted to see and to see Trustee Gracia, President Gracia, if we could have an opportunity to have a discussion on that to see where we're at. So I have some direction moving forward.
Yeah, I think it will make sense to just go down the line and get everyone's opinion. So Student Board Representative Gomez, would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that we need to talk about in a future meeting.
Okay. Trustee Gonzalez Myers,
Yes,
Trustee Hart,
I'm not voting to, but yes, voting to add it to the item.
Yeah, I'm aligned on that as well. I think these are excellent. I can see the amount of work that you guys put into putting these together for us, and I definitely see us moving towards adopting them.
Trustee Jankowicz.
Yeah, thank you for the deep dive and absolutely, I would vote in favor of adopting these as specs for a standard for NVUSD.
Trustee Chu.
So for avoiding what we had before with Canyon Oaks and to realize what we have now for ACMS going forward, I would say definitely yes.
Trustee Riser.
Absolutely. It makes so much sense. I can see how strategically aligned and unifying this is, and also how kind of shrewd and cost saving it will be, because we're not reinventing the wheel with every project.
Trustee Water.
Yes, I like it because we are enhancing what we already have, and that's a version of sustainability.
I too am in favor of seeing this at a future board meeting. I think we have a real opportunity not only for cost savings, but to improve the cultures of our campuses and the products that our students experience on a day-to-day basis. And hopefully get some good outdoor space.
So thank you, trustees, and thank you for eliciting the position of all the trustees for our future action items. So I just want to be clear and manage expectations. So what we would do, this is the presentation on the ed specs. This study session serves as the presentation. If community members or staff are interested in learning more about them, they have this study session as a reference and the material that was attached. We would just bring the ed specs as an action item. We will not represent in a future board meeting. This was the presentation. So it'll come as an action item and you all can speak to your experience in this study session as your rationale on how you're going to vote, but we won't represent at a business meeting, if that makes sense.
I think it makes plenty of sense. We've been here for almost 3 hours. I don't know that we need to have
I was just gonna say
another
the same thing.
presentation.
Yeah, but no, the reason I bring that up is because you might think, well, people don't come to study sessions. Should we redo it in a formal business meeting and pair it with the action item? And I think that that would be incredibly inefficient and it's not necessary. Someone wants to learn about it, they can watch the archived video of this.
Yeah.
I want to just recognize before President Gracia moves to close the meeting. I just want to recognize the work of Assistant Superintendent Mike Pearson, Kelly Jorgensen from Van Pelt Construction, and the other consultants. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I know it has been an 8-month journey. I know we started it before the 22-23 school year started. I remember that first meeting over at American Canyon High School with you, Kathleen. And it sounded like, oh my gosh, could we really get this all done and accomplished? I think we had this goal in mind of the study session being kind of the pinnacle of the work. And it's just great to see what has been accomplished over the last 8 months. Assistant Superintendent Pearson, you're just relentless about getting projects like this done.
Hope that's in a good way.
Yeah, in a fast and furious way, but also in a very thorough, comprehensive way. So the pace is intense, but it's, details are not skipped despite the relentless pace. I want to just recognize and just have it here on the record, because this will be an archived video, is that under the direction and leadership of Assistant Superintendent Pearson, 2 important bodies of work have been created that will transcend people and time and board compositions. And he and I talked about them today in our one-on-one. So we now have a full comprehensive facilities assessment, if you remember, of all of our buildings. And he led that work. And now we're pairing that with the ed specs, right? So for a school district, and I know I have, is Bill Savage
Yep,
still here?
Bill's still here. Yep.
I know Bill, and he's worked in, many, many school districts. And I know you're going to tell me, like, it's very rare for school districts to have those 2 tools to be as complete as our 2 tools are in terms of the facilities assessment and the ed specs. And now these become 2 powerful tools for any future facility opportunity that emerges, right? Knowing where we are and knowing our potential and where we want to go. What Mr. Pearson and I discussed this morning was putting a structure and mechanism in place to make sure that these things stay updated, right? We don't want to do this, like adopt this, and then it just goes on the shelf and we never look at it and it was a moment in time. as opposed to an ongoing, it's how we do business in facilities. So when he executes on summer projects, he'll have a mechanism in place to update that facilities assessment, right? So that thing's always current annually, and we're talking about really efficient ways to put that structure in place. And like was mentioned here, pairing a common structure around updating the ed specs as things evolve and change. Probably doesn't have to happen every year like the experts have told us, but looking at it every 3 years and getting it updated. So I want to say that to the board as people move in and out. We're here right now committed to putting those structures in place. But I think from an accountability perspective, you as a board want to be asking those questions. Our ed specs being looked at and updated with the appropriate frequency? Is our facilities assessment tool being updated with consistency and frequency?
Your microphone, please.
When you look at it every 3 years, whatever the time frame, however you determine that, is that with this team? Is that a solo? Can we do that in-house?
Yeah, it's a combination.
What does that look like?
It looks like we're still sort of.
I would assume so, but I just.
We would like to be able to, ultimately, I think we would like to be able to have it in-house. So we would like to be able to do it after summer. So for example, when we let's say the bare minimum, we recarpet, 10 rooms, we would like to be able to go and update that document so that we capture those 10 rooms.
That's the assessment about the ed specs.
Oh, the ed specs.
Because that
Sorry.
Being current and being progressive and making sure that we understand what's going on industry-wide, district-wide, statewide, so that we don't fall behind.
Yeah.
So
I think I like to be very, what do I do, you guys? I'm not too scattered, but no, I mean, I like to always keep challenging, like what's new out there, what's going on out there. And so I think we would use,
it would be a team effort every year so that those that are in the industry give us their perspective so that our live document is a reflection of the current time outside of our space that we may not.
Yeah. And the document that we've created will continue to update as we need to, but it also, I think, my goal is to provide a template for someone to then, improve upon. And keep it as a living document through the district. There's nothing worse than anything than if I create something and all it does is collect dust.
Yes.
And so it's important that it has the ability to continue to evolve, but it requires, oversight by a lot of different people, myself included, but I think our Board of Education, and our all of our staff to say to ourselves, like, where is that document? And do we actually need to dust it off because it's been sitting for too long and we need to make sure it's relevant. So. Yeah. So before I conclude, just real quick, I just want to thank everybody on my team for for being here and doing what they did. Yeah. I know you heard from Kathleen and you heard from Devin, and they did a phenomenal job, but Wes did a lot of work as well too for Devin and walking sites and doing a lot of the reports and things like that. And then I wouldn't be as successful as I am without Bill Savage and Kelly Jorgensen. Both of these folks are super talented and have great knowledge, and they know people like these folks that are behind me, and it just makes me that much more successful. So I want to say, thank you to all of you for that, and just appreciate your work. And it is definitely a team effort. So thanks again. I have a great team.
Great.
Mr. Michaels, do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, we do. Our first speaker is Jim Wilson. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Thanks. My name is Jim Wilson. I live in Napa. My sons are Finnish high school graduates. I had a grandson 2 years old here in town. Thank you for the lively discussion. I'm really glad I came to this meeting on education design specs. I want to talk about the guiding principle number 3, sustainability, secondary education sustainability, where school facilities will be environmentally sustainable. And what comes to mind is the climate emergency resolution that you adopted almost 4 years ago in 2019, May of 2019, which basically protects our children's future because of climate breakdown. And so I'd like to ask if we can clarify what sustainable means in the context of that climate emergency resolution. I think we have a huge educational component here. As far as the sustainability standard, I think it should serve the climate emergency's organizing principle with climate stabilizing design criteria consistent with emergency measures needed to achieve the 2030 net zero climate pollution goal. The resolution acknowledges that we are deeply within a climate emergency. We can't forget this. It needs to be part of our thinking and our doing in all of our planning and development. Let's please do that, or if we are already, let's recognize that. And I think the requests for proposals that are going out also need to do that. They need to recognize that we're in a climate emergency and we have that 2030 net zero goal. The resolution calls for education of all staff, including the latest climate science and emergency mobilizations efforts needed at the level the science demands. And it recognizes the significant negative impact that accelerating climate breakdown has on the health and learning of students and their communities. As well, the education of all staff. This piece was done last week at Professional Development Day. Thank you very much. It was a well-received program called Climate Change, empowering students to tackle climate change while teaching literacy, science, and community engagement. And I think, one of the things that came out of those sessions was discussion of an energy audit, with ideas arising in particular out of the student body participation in the Napa County Climate Challenge. There are 2 schools immersed in that now, American Canyon High School and New Tech High. And so I would like to say that the resolution finally focuses on action. One action specifically calls for establishing targets for reducing the district's heat trapping pollution. And let's take this design specs as an opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Mr. Michaels, do we have any further public comment?
There is no further public comment.
All right, then I will move that we adjourn this meeting.
I'll second.
First by myself, second by Trustee Chu. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Meeting is adjourned.